The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from a book by an old acquaintance and colleague of mine, Alan Combs, who passed away this last year. The book is called Thank the Liberals. You're a liberal. If you think you're a conservative, that assertion is surely quite shocking. You may even be so upset upon reading this that you're considering either throwing this book down, shooting a hole in it with your shotgun, or even worse, burning it the way Florida Pastor Terry Jones burned the Koran. Or you may feel the need to toss this book aside even temporarily and find solace in your Bible. However, that's a fairly liberal book too, so it may not help you get any more comfortable than this one will. The very fact that you haven't done any of these things yet shows how open-minded you are. So don't disappoint and go all Terry Jones on me here. If right now you're saying, but Alan, there's no way I'm a liberal, just do me the favor of hearing me out. Exhibit A to prove my point that you're a liberal, maybe in conservative clothing, is that you're an American. If you're not an American, keep reading. You'll discover how great it is to be one. As an American, you're free right now to put this book down. Go outside for a walk, take a drive, or head to the nearest airport and fly anywhere in the world. Or you can stay home, go online, and get almost any information you want without it being firewalled by the government. And that's largely because liberals have stood up against such regulations as the Stop Online Piracy Act and the Protect IP Act, SOPA and BIPA, that would have squelched free speech on the internet and made criminals out of innocent content providers. This doesn't mean the government hasn't already overreached. When the government knows what websites you're going to because of the very unpatriotic Patriot Act, they're likely not paying too much attention to you and won't do anything about it. You want to leave your job, start a business, go to a food court, gorge out, just goof off. This is the land of the free, so go ahead after you're done with this book. America was founded on a liberal idea. The concept of a representative democracy without a state religion was a move leftward from the motherland, where the Church of England dictated certain laws and mores. Our forefathers thought that a state religion was repressive, and so they established one of our key tenets, freedom of and from religion. There can be no religious test to hold public office in America. That's liberal. A commander-in-chief who's a civilian, not a member of the military, it's liberal. Taxation with representation, that's liberal. A tripartite form of government where no one branch can rule over the others, yep, that's liberal too. Our founders, the ones conservatives revere so much, took these very liberal ideas and made them so much a part of our DNA that America is unthinkable without them. Let's look at some of the parts of our founding documents that often don't get enough press, but show how liberal we are simply because we're American. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution lays out the rights of Congress, stating in part that they have the right to, quote, lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, end quote. But the government is specifically charged with providing for the general welfare of our population has been much disputed by conservatives. Over time, liberals have fought for numerous items that fall in this category that have greatly benefited Americans, programs conservatives forgot they initially opposed. You'll read about them later in the chapter, Have You Thanked a Liberal Today? Article 1, Section 8 also guarantees your right to your personal intellectual property by saying that Congress has the right to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. If you invent something or write something, it's not the property of the government. This is why entrepreneurs and scientists flock to America. They know that here they are free to create and they will get the credit they deserve for their work. Our founding documents established a court system giving us a way to seek redress from grievances. The Constitution establishes the creation of various courts available for different purposes depending on the issue at hand. Congress has the authority to create bankruptcy courts and tax courts to handle specific issues. Article 3 says the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as Congress may from time to time ordain and establish, giving us a federal court system and an appeals process. Article 1, Section 9 gives us the right to seek relief from unlawful imprisonment. A prisoner or someone on his or her behalf can petition for a writ of habeas corpus, an order from the government that it has the right to detain the person in question. This protects us from being held arbitrarily by the state without evidence and without just cause. Our entire judicial system, outlined in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of our Constitution, is built on a liberal idea. The focus is on protecting the individual, especially the minority, from the tyranny of the majority. For example, the presumption of innocence, which is implied by the right to remain silent and the right to a jury, places the burden of proof on the prosecutor. The Fifth Amendment calls for grand juries to protect us from being prosecuted when there isn't enough evidence to bring a case against us. This amendment also guarantees that we can't be tried for the same crime twice, and that we are protected from having to testify against ourselves. This was originally written to guard against torture and forced confessions. Most important, we can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. If charged with a crime, there is a process in place to guarantee us a fair trial. This includes being given adequate notice to prepare a defense against those charges. The Fifth Amendment also contains the promise that the government can't take our property away without just compensation. We probably take all this for granted, but that's probably because we've never lived in a country where a terrifying knock on the door at 3 a.m. could mean a phony trial in a kangaroo court or a demand that we leave our homes because someone from the government needs or wants them. The Sixth Amendment continues the discussion of our judicial system through the promise that anyone accused of committing a crime has a right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of peers in the jurisdiction where the alleged crime was committed. You have the right to be told the charges against you, to confront your accuser in court, to have witnesses on your behalf, and to have counsel represent you. Thank the Liberals by Alan Hall.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Wednesday, the first hour of our program. It must be time for Middays with Mark. That's what we're calling it, right, Congressman?
That's right, Tom. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, it's Middays with Mark Pocan, the U.S. Congressman representing the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus here in Washington, D.C., in the House of Representatives. Pocan.house.gov is the website, and you can tweet him at Rep, R-E-P, as in Representative, Rep Mark Pocan. Congressman, and by the way, if you have any questions for Congressman Pocan, our number is 202-808-9925. Lines are open, as they say in the radio business, and he will be taking your calls as soon as we have a brief conversation. So, Congressman, what's at the top of your hit parade today?
Well, I think, getting ready for going back next week, we're in for 12 days in September in which we have to pass a budget by September 30th, debt ceiling either going to be tied to it or immediately following, and a threat from the president that if he doesn't, get the wall, he's going to shut down government. So, that has a huge impact across the board for everyone. So I think that's going to be kind of at front of mind for most members returning.
Yeah. What is the status? Today is the last day. In fact, let me get over to the website. I was just there this morning. If you go to fcc.gov and then click on public comment, and then at the very top of public comment is the public comments, which closed today on restoring internet freedom. It shows 8,570,000 what do you call it? People have posted there. And if you go on and look, they're all, saying, in fact, now it's showing 21.8 million results. So there must be 21.8 million comments here. Your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, you would think that would be more than satisfactory for them to not go in this direction, but they're trying to play with a line that the big providers, AT&T and Verizon and Comcast and a few others, really want to be able to control more around the net. Not only do they want to charge you for internet access, but would also like to charge websites for a fast lane access. What that means are the big companies with lots of money can get access to you quicker rather than that local business that you may buy from that has a web presence. So it's a bad idea, and I think anyone who's not one of the biggest telecom providers should be against it. But, this is Trump's appointments on the FCC, and I think we're concerned of what direction they may go.
Yeah. I find it amazing that the television, the cable TV networks are owned by companies that are suing the government to end net neutrality, and they're not discussing this topic at all. I'm just maybe they have been today and I missed it, but like I said, today is the last day for comments. This is amazing.
I think if people can comment, I mean, it's a good thing to make sure the more they have, the harder it's going to be for them to come up with a decision that's just in the best interest of the telecommunication companies. So if people can, they should try to do it today.
Now, the Republicans they were not enthusiastic about sending money, particularly Texas Republicans, sending money for Hurricane Sandy relief. And as I recall, they weren't all that enthusiastic about even Hurricane Katrina relief after 1,800 people died while George W. Bush was out having cake with John McCain at a birthday party. What's going on with this right now? How do you expect this to play out in Congress?
Well, this is going to be, I think, particularly interesting because when we had Hurricane Sandy relief, Paul Ryan voted against it. 179 Republicans voted against it. I believe everyone in Texas but one Republican voted against it, and that was a wrong vote for them, right? I mean, we have to, or as a country, we have to, if there's a big disaster, we all have to be there for it. And it's been interesting to watch Republicans in the Northeast who were affected by Sandy, who voted for Sandy relief, saying, "Hey, we're going to support Texas because this is what our job as a country is." But then to watch, Ted Cruz and other House Republicans from Texas trying to spin this, that there was a bunch of pork and everything else, and Cruz got 3 Pinocchios for that. I mean, this is our job. This is why you have government, and it's going to be interesting if we have people trying to stop assistance going to Texas. And Speaker Paul Ryan, who's supposed to be the adult, gets credit often for being the adult, was one of the people who voted against Hurricane Sandy relief, and I think that's significant.
Yeah. Today is the day that Trump is supposed to be officially starting to peddle his so-called tax reform. There's a great piece in the New York Times today by Sarah Anderson titled "It's a Myth That Corporate Tax Cuts Make More Jobs." What is the position of the Congressional Progressive Caucus on this?
Well, we would love to see, if you want to have tax reform, then we'll give you a very, very different direction to go. We think that you should have higher rates on some of those who are making more money, and let's respect those who are working Americans. If you're going to talk about taxes, not just the top 1% and 2%, not just corporations. We already have plenty of loopholes. Corporations can buy a company in Ireland and do a tax inversion and pay nothing, which many of them do. There's already all these loopholes. I think it's going to be enormously hard for them to get anything done because I would say 20% of my meetings, Tom, in Washington are people who have some little niche carved out of a tax break and they want to preserve it, and that makes it harder than healthcare, and we saw how successful they were on that. But we would go in a very, very different direction, making sure that those who have the most can pay a greater share, and that we provide real relief to people who are working class Americans and those aspiring to be in the working class.
Yeah. I'm watching with considerable horror both the activities of Scott Pruitt and Ryan Zinke at EPA and Interior, respectively, and the lack of coverage. These guys are aggressively, making it easier and more profitable for big companies to poison our air and our water and our food supply, and open up public lands for drilling and mining and all this kind of stuff. It seems crazy to me. Is there anything that y'all in Congress can do about this?
Well, I go back to probably what I say almost every week is elections have consequences, right? The Republicans are in charge of the House, the Senate, and the White House. They're allowing these actions. It's very, very difficult. It's not just in this area. I was speaking with a bunch of labor leaders this morning talking about all the rule changes that the Obama administration put in place in the last year of their administration that are being turned back from OSHA to union rules to all sorts of things. And yet you don't hear much about those either. Unfortunately, whatever the president says in 140 characters will get all the press from the corporate media, and some of these real actions that are affecting people across the country don't get the same attention. And, unfortunately, I don't see Paul Ryan trying to change direction on that because he's so complicit with whatever happens out of the Trump administration. We're going to have a lot to fix when we finally get the House majority back.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that's a year and a half from now. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the House of Representatives. Pocan.house.gov, your opportunity to ask a congressman a question. Middays with Mark.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
More with Congressman Mark Pocan right after this. Your calls. And welcome back. Carl in Machesney Park, Illinois. Hey, Carl, what's up?
Hi. I was wondering how the Iron Stash is doing in his campaign against Paul Ryan. I understand he's raising a ton of money.
Congressman?
Yeah, Randy Bryce is doing a great job, and I believe watching Rachel Maddow tonight might be something useful for some folks to do because I understand they had a poll and they may be releasing some results which are very, very positive for Randy Bryce. He's working real hard. He's been handling the issues right, working real hard on things like healthcare and other issues to provide a real contrast. This is a real race. Paul Ryan is in for the election of his lifetime. We have a chance to flip a seat just across where you live in Machesney Park into Wisconsin. And I think people should be watching this race as one of the top races in the country to be really keeping track of.
Gary in Cooperstown, New York, watching Free Speech TV there. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. I just I mentioned to the screener that this morning I was watching MSNBC, and an Al Jazeera English reporter, Shahid Ratansi, was talking about climate change and how it affected the situation in Texas. And when he got to talking about the money that was made by the oil company, the denial of the oil companies, and then also that Texas politicians would be held responsible, they cut them off. And I know we talk about this a lot, about the corporate media not covering climate change, but I've got living proof on tape that they did it. We never saw anything else of Shahid and the rest of the reporting. They went to other rescues and other, things that would be, other shiny objects, if you will. And I just wondered about, is there anything anybody can do other than just not watch MSNBC, but just the hypocrisy of not covering this in the light that it should be?
Sure, Gary. Well, first of all, I think what we've learned is, the oil industry has known about this for a long time and selectively chose to do nothing. That information is starting to get out more. But, I think any of these Texas Republicans who haven't voted for flood relief for other areas, who still deny climate change as this happens to their own communities and their own state, I think the flood insurance debate that we have coming up also very likely in September, how can you not argue that we're having major climate changes and that they've got to point to something that's doing that? I'm hopeful that, again, people are way ahead of where elected officials are. Elected officials are still kowtowing to the oil and other industries that don't want to admit there's climate change. But we're winning because people understand what's happening, and we just have to replace the people who won't change their ways.
Yeah. Seems like a pretty straightforward process. Congressman, we just have 30 seconds till we hit the break. What's your best advice for people who want to change that situation?
Well, I think, whatever group you think is doing the best job on those issues, I always argue double down with those groups right now. They can magnify your voice, call your representatives, make sure they know where you stand. People are doing that more than ever. But then work with those groups that you believe in on those issues you care about and let them magnify your voice. We're winning on all of these fronts if we keep unified.
Yeah. And I don't even think it's a big if. I think people are really coming together right now. And you're one of the real heroes of the movement. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, pocan.house.gov, and website. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. We'll be right back with more of your calls.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan on the line with us, taking your calls. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program on this Wednesday first hour. And Deborah in St. Paul, Minnesota. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. Excuse me. I just had an idea. Maybe people thought of this before, but is it possible we could, we all get a Social Security number. Could we all get a voting number so then there isn't a problem with the names, duplicating, and maybe that would alleviate that problem?
Well, and Deborah, that is part of what we have a bill right now to say if you're going to purge someone, you have to have their Social Security number to prove that they're not that the two people are the same number. Because what they're doing is taking Jose Rodriguez in Florida and Jose Rodriguez in Oklahoma and just purging them because there's two Jose Rodriguez, which is still a fairly common name and not enough to differentiate. Therefore, we're saying you need a middle name, you need a Social Security number. But I think it does come to this automatic voter registration issue. I mean, how can we make sure that it's not a burden to become to be able to do your civic duty, which is to vote? And I think we should have all suggestions on the table, Deborah. And you're right, we all get a Social Security number. I know that some people. I think we need to look at all options to figure out how we can ensure that that is a sacred right, in addition to putting it as part of our Constitution, which Keith Ellison from your area and I are trying to do.
Kevin in Santa Fe, New Mexico. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call, Congressman Pocan. I am concerned about the South Texas nuclear plant. Not only did this hurricane visit every one of our major refineries in Houston, Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Lake Charles, but there are 3 nuclear plants in its path, and with a floodgates forecasting a 45-foot crest in Bay City and a 41-foot retaining wall around the South Texas plant, I'm a little concerned, especially with Rick Perry in charge. Oof.
Yeah. That's Rick Perry alone in charge of anything should make people worry. But your point is well taken. And again, it goes back to this whole debate around climate change. People who want to ignore the science because there's some special interests that want them to ignore the science, and yet that's a real life ramification. If we have problems with power, with nuclear plants, with just about anything, that's affecting real people. Real people will die, and you can't just continue to ignore it because the oil industry is going to keep practicing in the exact same way. So I think it kind of comes back to that original fight. I think most people, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, understand what climate change is. We have to just force that upon those who are our so-called leaders.
Dave in Canton, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan. Dave, let's stand serious. XM.
Hello.
Hey, Dave, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. Thanks for taking my call. I'm concerned about President Trump's pardon activities. Is there any way that the Senate or the Congress can pass a bill that limits his powers to pardon?
I'll tell you, I think we may have to, with this president, you have to look at everything differently because he's operating so differently. I mean, I think part of the pardon that happened for the sheriff in Arizona was based on just the president thinking that some of his base are outright racist and he's doing it for them. And quite honestly, for himself. But I think a part of it was a signal to all the people that are being called in on the investigations on Russia that, hey, look, I'll have your backs early and often. You don't even have to ask for it, because they're claiming sheriff didn't even ask for it, and all of a sudden got the pardon. I think there's more of a message that came out of that, not just to keep his race baiting that he's been doing over the last several weeks, which has been just awful, but also to send a message that, keep quiet, and if something happens to you, I can take care of you. I've got the power of pardon. I think he enjoys king-like powers as a president.
Yeah. Well, he's always been a CEO, which is functionally a king. I mean,
right.
Corporations are essentially feudal institutions, so maybe he just thinks that's how it's supposed to be. Matt in Norfolk, Virginia, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Congressman Pocan, it's an honor to speak with you today. My question is about the budget. I don't know how the budget rules work, but if he threatens to veto your budget bill if it doesn't include the wall, do you guys have the power to overrule his veto? And if so, is there any sort of plan or steps being made to do so?
Well, I think we're probably a little ahead of ourselves because, first of all, I think many of the Republicans support what he's doing on the wall. There are some, remarkably, on border districts who know it's a bad idea that may not support that. But, if he would veto it, yes, we would have the ability to override. But I think that is many steps yet ahead. And I personally think often when the president says something, it's bravado. It's when he doesn't say it, you got to watch out. Like when he did the initial ban on people who are transgender serving in the military. We didn't have advance notice. It just happened in a tweet. I think that's the problem. He often puts these ideas out. He does them in rally settings. He does it for the applause from his adoring fans to cover his narcissism. But I don't know if he'll actually live up to it, one. But more importantly, I think the Republicans likely will keep funding in for the wall because most of them support that.
Sam in Estes Park, Colorado. Sam, we got a minute to the break. Real quick question for Congressman Pocan.
Yes, impeachment. I called my representatives here in Colorado, Senator Bennett, Gardner, and Congressman Paulus, and I wasn't surprised by Gardner's response about impeachment because he's a Republican, but I was surprised that Bennett and Paulus didn't really seem, well, they're staffers. I spoke to staffers, didn't seem that they had any statement of any sort of force or strength on this issue. And I'm just wondering how come it seems to me through them that the Democrats aren't taking up this rhetorical space on the battlefield much more passionately.
Yeah, Sam, it's going to be hard in 20 seconds, but let me say this. I think many of our members are talking about it. We say we have every option open, including impeachment. And we also realize that you need a majority, you need a bunch of Republicans to join with us in order to do that. And we're not there yet, but we need to keep the pressure on because so far I've heard a new case for impeachment that I thought was very compelling this week, and I think we need to keep every option open.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan in our Middays with Mark Hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. First hour Wednesday, Congressman Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, a Democrat from Wisconsin, taking your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. With the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from Healing ADD. Richard Bandler, the founder of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP, wrote the foreword for this book. And it's basically a book on NLP as applied to people with ADHD. But it's actually a pretty good book on NLP, which is actually how I originally wrote it. So we're on Chapter 8 on page 80, Reconstructing the Past. Different types of memories, regardless of how anchored in reality or fantasy they may be, are stored in our brains in different ways. These forms of storage involve the 5 sensory modalities: sight, smell, hearing, taste, and feeling, and the subtle gradations of each sense, such as color, brightness, or contrast for the visual modality, for example. These gradations are referred to as submodalities. This is true for both adults and children. One of the ways our brain organizes information is according to the way it's stored.
Our senses pick up something in the outside world. Say we see an insect fly by. That's an objective thing that we've seen. However, before that image makes its way to our conscious brain, it's processed by other parts of the mind and tweaked and tuned. If it's a bug that frightens us, perhaps a wasp, then the mind sees it as a bigger object and in sharper contrast than it really is. Other objects in the picture, the background, buildings, grass, whatever, become more distant, dull, perhaps even less colorful. The mind may increase the volume of the sound associated with the wasp and also attach a feeling to the image, probably a variation on what we might interpret as fear or panic, a feeling felt perhaps in the pit of the stomach or the trembling of the hands. So here's a quick list of some of the submodalities that we commonly use to experience reality and store memory. In the visual field, color or black and white. So this is how do you remember things visually? Color or black and white, contrast, size, bordered or not, moving or still, brightness, graininess, distance from us, associated or disassociated. In other words, do we see the scene as we saw it or do we see ourselves in it? Focus, detail, texture, perspective, dimensionality, is it flat or 3D? Proportion, that's the visual field. In auditory, loudness, tonality, distance, pitch, melody, inflection, location, tempo, duration. Gustatory, salty, sweet, spicy, musty, bitter, familiar, delicate. Olfactory, strong, faint, intermittent, familiar, unique, musty, moist, damp, mildewy. Kinesthetic, the feeling. Hard, soft, cool, warm, sharp, electric, intensity, duration, speed, location. Now here's the amazing part. If you know what modalities and submodalities your mind uses to store a particular type of memory, happy, sad, hopeful, afraid, neutral, whatever kind of memory it is, then you can adjust the memories you have of the past to change their emotional feel. For example, think of something, a memory of something that you did in the recent past, such as brushing your teeth last night. Mentally list the qualities of the submodalities. Your list might look something like mine. I see a still picture in black and white without a lot of contrast or detail. Associated, I see the mirror in the sink, but not myself. No border, 3D, about 2 feet square, about 20 feet away from me. I can hear the sound of the water running and taste the mint of the toothpaste. If I concentrate on it, I can remember, or imagine remembering, the feeling of the toothpaste on my toothbrush on my gum and the smell of the toothpaste. The feelings I associate with the memory are pretty neutral. Boredom might be the best way to describe it. It's something I do every night. Now imagine a control panel just below the image, or wherever you'd like it to be, with levers and dials that you can use to change the various submodalities. Reach out and change a few of the submodalities and see how things change. When I move the picture from black and white to color, I suddenly feel curious and interested in the process of brushing my teeth. It seems fascinating. If I turn up the volume, I become uneasy. As I increase the mint taste, I feel more awake. Nobody knows why this works the way it does. One theory is that the brain stores information holographically rather than digitally, so that the brain sees its own storage capacity as a three-dimensional space. Because we experience the world through our senses, it makes sense that we could organize the mechanism for storing the information about our experience of the world along sensory lines as well. When something is put into a particular space, it acquires the sensory nature of that space, since sensory signals are how we experience the world. So when a memory is put into the boring category in our brain, it becomes, in my case, everybody's different, but it becomes, for me, black and white still pictures and all the other submodalities I described before. When the submodalities are adjusted and the pictures are turned into a color movie, it doesn't just change the memory. It actually causes us to interconnect with or slide to a different storage place, a physical different storage space in my holographic brain. There's also a concept known as a critical submodality. That's the submodality which has the ability to shift others, probably the primary hook into the place in the brain hologram where the memory is stored. As you're going through the various submodalities, changing each one a bit in one way or another, turning up or down the brightness, the volume, you'll notice that there's generally one particular one. It could be anything from volume to contrast to smell to brightness, anything. It causes the entire picture to change and creates a sudden shift in the feelings associated with that memory. That submodality shift is the critical submodality. And once you know what your critical submodalities are, you can do this process much quicker. One of the most common and most powerful critical submodalities is location. When you move a picture from where it is, for example, in front and to the right about 4 feet away to some other place, for example, in front and slightly over your eyes, only a foot away, it often changes dramatically its impact. So it goes from there to talk about how to take memories that bother you or that haunt you even and transform them into things that are simply just who cares memories. The book is Healing ADD, Simple Exercises That Will Change Your Daily Life. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A couple of quick reminders. I have a piece that was published on Alternet a few hours ago. We have to be vigilant about the coming smear project against Antifa. The media is busy creating a left-wing threat to balance the awful racist right-wing hordes who threaten civil society, just an FYI. And also, if you go over to fcc.gov and click on your filings, you'll see that as of today, there have been 21,800,000 people who have weighed in on net neutrality. As of the last 30 days, it's been 8.5 million people. A lot going on there. You might want to get your voice in. Today's the last day to do that. Congressman Mark Pocan on the line with us, taking your calls. It's our Midday with Mark segment. And Bobby in Kaiser, Oregon, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call. Congressman, I'm a veteran. I've been using the VA health system for over 20 years. I've had colonoscopies done. They found a polyp. Thank God hasn't turned cancerous yet. So I've had a few colonoscopies done. I get an annual physical every year. I've had a couple surgeries, and they've never billed me or charged me for anything. But since Trump's team has taken office, I've had 2 doctor visits, and now I've gotten a bill for $50 copayment for each of those visits. Is this something I can expect now, a $50 copayment? And do you know why this started?
I can't tell you why it started. What I can tell you is we're facing a number of attacks that are even greater than what you're mentioning when it comes to the VA system, because there is, I think, a true effort to privatize the system. So we started out with the so-called Choice Act because some people supposedly weren't getting good care. You know, we recognize the system in Arizona had bad management. In Wisconsin, at Toma, we had a problem with the prescription of opiates. But the vast majority of the VA system runs very, very well, and people get great care out of it. In fact, my Tea Party uncle in Colorado, who followed me around at a wedding once, telling me everything that was wrong with the federal government, at the very end said, "But leave my VA alone." So we understand that there's the value to it. Our fight right now is just fighting back against these little slippery slope bills to nick away and nick away and nick away, and eventually you won't have a functioning VA system. So keep vigilant and make sure you're reaching out to your representatives in Oregon, Bobby, about these bills because it's important that we hold the votes tight so that they don't destroy our VA system.
Scott in Xenia, Ohio, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon. Congressman, thank you for your service to your country, and Tom, thank you for the service you do every day.
My pleasure.
I am petrified of the right using Harvey as a political football. Legislatively, what can you do to keep them from boxing you into a corner when you vote for the relief for it by keeping off things like the wall or like tax breaks for the rich or the typical right-wing stuff that they're trying to do legislatively right now?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for your comments, Scott. And we're going to have to be vigilant on whatever they may do to try to put a package together. As you said, we've got this is the month we have to keep government open or face a shutdown. And everything from flood insurance could be attached, perhaps the wall, although I think they can still do that through the budget process. I don't think tax breaks would be able to, but you're right to be watching for everything. We're going to have to do that. I mean, it's important that we take care of everyone who's been affected by Harvey, but if they try to politicize that, we have to be able to stand up and have that backbone to make sure we're doing not just the right thing for the people of Texas and Louisiana, but also making sure that they don't pull a fast one on the American people.
Patrick in Seattle. Hey, Patrick, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom and Congressman Pocan. Thank you so much for your time and information. I'm calling about the issue of gerrymandering, and it seems like, yesterday there was an article in New York Times about the impact of Republican-controlled state houses strengthening their grip on their electability, and I'm just curious what the Democratic Party is doing to offset that trend.
Yeah, Patrick, great question. Gerrymandering is why we have a Tea Party, or their ability to continue to have power. Gerrymandering is why in Wisconsin we had 100,000 more votes for Democratic candidates for Congress, but they have 5 of the 8 seats in Wisconsin, and it's even worse in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Ohio. Gerrymandering is taking away that really one vote per person balance because they're selecting who votes for them rather than the other way around. So luckily, we're seeing Barack Obama and Eric Holder stand up nationally doing a bunch of work around this. It's very, very important work. We've got bills in Congress, but won't become law with a Republican House and a Republican Senate. But we're trying to do everything we can to talk about it. In Wisconsin, there's a major case that's before the Supreme Court right now. We're anxiously waiting for those results. I think in October we should see those. But you pegged it right. Gerrymandering and those state legislatures is so important in the next 2 election cycles. We have to pay attention to those legislative races because that's where the lines are drawn for both Congress and state legislative seats.
Paul in Denison, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom. And Congressman Pocan, it's an honor to speak with you, sir.
Thank you.
My question today has to do with organized crime, actually. I mean, now that we've elected essentially an organized mob boss as a president, and our Justice Department is now being run by this mafia, what steps can Congress begin to take to begin to actually rein in corporate power and put a stop to the monopoly and duopolies that we're seeing in every industry? And it just seems like things are kind of snowballing out of control.
Yeah, Paul, great concerns. And let me answer it in this way. I was heartened to see in the House and Senate Democrats' proposal for a bitter deal they put out there, one of the major focuses that they understood that's important that when we talk about economics, because that is the driving issue that unfortunately I don't think got the attention it needed to in 2016, is the antitrust laws that quite honestly came in under Bill Clinton and have now gone to a really terrible spot where we have consolidation in industries. There's a reason why one major airline was able to drag someone off a plane is because there's only a few major airlines to even choose from. And that's true in big real estate firms, big banking firms, go down the list. And it's those antitrust laws that often on the board of directors within a few industries have the same people on the boards of directors. So all the decisions are made to make sure they're enriched and not money put back into the company or the employees. So I was heartened to see that was one of the major planks of that better deal proposal. We are working on Mark DeSaulnier from California, Debbie Dingle from Michigan, Don Norcross from New Jersey, and myself, a future of work, wages, and labor project that we're putting out at the end of the month, and that's one of the major parcels of that. There's some good work happening to make sure that's more getting more public attention, and I think that's going to be positive, Paul, because I know people will agree with us on this when they see all the facts about it.
Dave in Canton, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello.
Hey, Dave.
How you doing? I was on a little earlier and I got cut off, and I was asking about the possibility of limiting Trump's pardon powers.
Well, it's already limited to he cannot pardon against state crimes. I mean, that's the giant loophole that could be used against Trump, isn't it, Congressman?
Yes. In fact, one of the interesting things that came out of a discussion I had heard in the last 24 hours was when you look at, for example, the interference with elections that happened, if the Trump administration won't do anything about it, perhaps individual election officials or secretaries of state or whatever the structure is in a given state, one of those 37 or 39 states that were hacked into, they should have a legal recourse and ability to go after it. So I think the president does have somewhat of a limited pardon, but we can be creative and find other ways to make sure that we're still getting to the truth and getting the results we need.
Leslie in Central Square, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello?
Leslie, you're on the air.
Yes. I wanted to talk about a couple of things quick like here. In 1996, I think it was, Bill Clinton signed a law into law with Newt Gingrich with the Communications Act. I can't name it right now. I assume you guys can.
It's called the Telecommunications Act of 1996, yes.
Yes, exactly. What that did was it took away our freedom of the press. We have no freedom of the press because of that law, okay? And the Democrats have never done nothing about it after that, okay? And it's been 25 years or more. No, there's no freedom of press. You got 6 conglomerates, and they trade information back and forth all the time and stuff. And I don't believe that's legal either. Okay, this is very terrible. This is the stuff that makes America work, you know. And we don't have a free press. We don't.
Well, let's get Congressman Pocan's thoughts on this.
Well, I think, Leslie, I agree that there are some concerns on how the corporate media covers things and doesn't cover things because, trust me, we've often tried as a progressive caucus. We have rallies and press conferences with lots of people, and they never get covered by the corporate media because if that's not selling detergent during the news hour, it may not get covered. And I think some is explicit. They don't cover things because of who their advertisers are or who their owners are. I'm a journalism major. I still believe there is a good amount of freedom of the press. However, there are certainly challenges out there. And if we have something like the net neutrality law change, I think that's an attack on that freedom of press. And there's other things that could happen as well, especially in an administration that treats the media like they do, trying to demonize them in order to get their agenda done.
Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. 202-808-9925 is our telephone number. You can reach Congressman Pocan. You can check out his website at pocan, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at repmark, M-A-R-K, Pocan, P-O-C-A-N. And we'll be right back with more of your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back in just a second with more of your calls. And welcome back. Rob in Milpitas, California. You are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Thank you, Tom. And I'm calling about the resolution that was passed this past Sunday at the California Democratic Party Executive Board meeting, which called on the DNC to essentially stop ignoring voter suppression and rigged vote counting machines. As we kind of saw in the Ossoff campaign, no matter what we as Democrats do to get the vote out, the voting counting machines seem to flip the results because it appears that John Ossoff got 2 votes for every 1 vote that Karen Handel got. And I was wondering, Congressman, what can we possibly do to get the DNC to pay attention to the rigged vote counting machines and start turning this around? Because I think we already have enough voters going to the polls. Even, they've got gerrymandering, they've got all the other voter suppression methods, but once we get there, our votes are not being properly counted.
Yeah, so Rob, I think you bring up a really strong point because one of the concerns that I saw along with Keith Ellison and Hank Johnson, Keith Ellison from Minnesota, Hank Johnson from Georgia, was the hacking that happened and the fact that they were going after the companies that make our voting machines and going after election officials. So what we did is we introduced a bill called the SAFE Act, and what it does is a couple of things. One, it makes sure that every electronic voting machine has a receipt, so you have a paper receipt. 2, it makes sure there's random auditing afterwards, 5% auditing, so that it's less of an incentive for anyone to try to rig an election because you can get caught during that process. 3, it makes sure that we have the commission that the Republicans originally earlier voted to get rid of that has to approve the patches that go through. And 4, it puts our entire election system under the nation's critical infrastructure definition, which is what our financial systems and our utilities are under for the utmost protection. We have to do some of those things at a bare minimum to protect that election infrastructure so we have the integrity protected. And there's more things we can do as well, and you brought gerrymandering up and other issues. But on the election machines themselves, let's make sure that they are absolutely – you still have a commission to approve any patches and changes that happen. Let's have a paper ballot. Let's have random audits of those elections.
Ireland tried our electronic voting machines in one election. They not only got rid of them, they refused to sell them as voting machines. They were afraid somebody might actually buy them and use them for that. So they sold them into the scrap metal market based on the weight of them. And they were crushed and sold by the ton or by the pound. Why should we have any computers, particularly privatized ones, at all in our voting chain?
Well, and I think, that's a real significant conversation. If we are going to see future attacks, which I think we're going to see, why do we have 5 companies, including one company that has been explicit supporter of Republican politicians, making machines? Part of our infrastructure maybe should also be that we as a country are going to have that production. There's computerized machines that aren't the touch screen ones, right? I mean, there's ones where you fill in the Scanitronic, and those
Sure.
I've done hand recounts. So I don't want to say anything computerized, but I do think, we've got to have that security within any machine that is electronic.
Yeah, I remember in Georgia years ago. We had a producer. His on-air name was Zen Pickle, and he lived in Marietta, Georgia, and he went to vote. And this was in a minority area. He went to vote, and he tried to write in a name, and it crashed the machine. He crashed 6 voting machines in a row, and each one of them, they had to wipe all the memory cards. All the previous votes got lost. Anyhow, we'll be right back. Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Anthony in Watsonville, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Hartman, for taking my call.
Sure.
Thank you, Congressman Pocan. My question is about voter suppression, and we're always on the defense with the Republican Party. They're always at one step ahead. My thought is, if this cross-check by Chris Kobach goes through, they try to push a bill. Could we have a rider on the bill so if a corporation gets caught doing something illegally, they can't contribute to the Republican Party, like a felon can't vote?
Anthony, I like your thinking. That's an interesting suggestion. Part of the problem right now is it's hard to get anything attached to a bill if it, with a Republican House, Senate, and President. But it's an interesting concept because I think many of us have a problem with the idea that a corporation is a person when it comes to campaign contributions, but not when it comes to putting someone in prison. And I like the type of outside-the-box thinking you have. And I think
any corporation convicted of a felony cannot lobby for the next 20 years or something like that, until they've had their parole, their probation. That's
be a person.
That is a great idea. Sheena in Prairie Grove, Arkansas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thank you guys for what you do. Representative, my question, I heard you mention it a week or two ago about bill, I believe you said it was H.R. 669, that would prevent any president from initiating a first strike only. And I think you said it was sitting in Paul Ryan's office, and I was wondering if there's any movement on that, because that's what terrifies me the most with this president.
Yeah, I don't know the number offhand. I apologize because there's over 5,000 bills in there. I think the only one I really know is 676 Medicare for All because I talk about it just about every day. But on that, there's so far no movement that we have on that bill, and I doubt, given Paul Ryan's experience on what he just did to us on the reauthorization for Congress to get involved on declaring war, that he would be very good at helping us out on this one either.
Dave in Somerville, South Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, good afternoon, sir. Congressman, quick question. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and just about all of my friends who are in unions there voted for Trump. And I still can't figure that out. But is it illegal or legal for you as a representative to attend a union meeting and try to explain to these guys, what they're voting for and how they're, hurting their future by voting Republican?
Yeah, Dave. So first of all, no, it's not illegal. This morning I sat down with about 50 labor leaders in my district. I'm part of IUPAT, the Painters and Allied Trades myself. I think what we found, and I've talked to a number of union leaders who've polled their members afterwards, there's a lot of economic frustration out there, and they think that Washington and the system and the elite still run things, and I don't think they're wrong. And they looked at Trump. Many people stayed home, and that's what we saw in Wisconsin. A lot of union people just decided that the Democrats didn't speak to them in the last election, and they still didn't trust Donald Trump. And some went with Donald Trump because he actually gave a very good surface answer on trade. The problem is his details really weren't there, but they've been impacted by trade. So I think our job is to do a much better job on talking on those economic core issues. That includes collective bargaining. We have better wages and better working conditions. People can go home at the end of the day without a risk of dying or being injured at work because of unions. And we need to get that message out, especially with Labor Day coming up on Monday. So I think we need to really get more of a reintroductory lesson about what unions have done throughout history, why we have weekends, why we have a 40-hour work week, et cetera. But no, it's not illegal to go to union meetings, and I would hope more elected officials would do it.
Kerry in Homestead, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Kerry?
Homestead, Florida. Yeah, that's me, Kerry Cox.
Yep, you're on the air.
Mr. Hartman, thank you for taking my call. I really appreciate it. This is my first time.
Thank you.
And I want to thank the congressman for being there with you. It shows bravery, for one thing. That's most important to me. But I'd like to ask the congressman, would he a proposal for a national identification for voting registration in the national elections, and you can have the duplicate of both of them. I'm sorry, redundancy at least. So
no, I hear you, Terry. So first of all, let me just say, I appreciate Tom opening up this opportunity because I consider I'm part of the legislative arm of the resistance, and what I'm trying to do is share what's happening in Washington while you're all contacting your representatives and helping us provide with ideas. We're all on the same team, so this is a great opportunity, and I thank Tom for what he's doing in connecting all of us. I think anything we can do to get to automatic voter registration, it shouldn't be a barrier. It shouldn't be a timeline. We need to get much better on this. That's why I've, along with Keith Ellison, proposed a constitutional amendment to guarantee a right to vote that would do that. I'm open to pretty much anything that would make it easier for people to vote legally, which is the way they're voting.
Okay, Chuck in Winter Park, Maine. We have 90 seconds to the end of the hour, Chuck. A real quick question, please, for Congressman Pocan.
Yes, sir. I'm very concerned about hedge funds. Hedge funds have caused a lot of trouble for us here in a little village in Maine. We had two of them. One bought up all the medical clinics, and the other one bought up all the phones. So it's a real problem, and I don't know how this figures in the plans, taxation plans, but I certainly have a fear of these hedge funds.
Okay, let's ask Congressman Pocan his thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, first, I think around taxation, when it comes to passive income and other things, we do need to have a different conversation because I think there are strong arguments that we should be taxing rates differently on some of that income so that we're getting a fair compensation as everyone else who's making money. My big fear, quite honestly, a little broader, if I can, Chuck, is that they're rolling back Dodd-Frank across the board, and that's going to take us back to the pre-2008 era, and that almost devastated the economy. We can't let that happen, and I think we have to really push back on our elected officials who are doing that and make sure people know we want consumer protections, and we can't let the banksters go back to being banksters.
Do you think they're going to succeed in gutting Dodd-Frank?
They are right now in the House, and if they can get it through the Senate, we got to be careful of those few swing Democrats on what they could possibly accept. But the Republicans are almost unanimous in trying to gut it. To be fair, there's a few things that could be fixed because we haven't been doing our jobs. The bureaucrats might have been a little aggressive on some of the.
But that's not what they're interested in. Yeah.
No.
Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Rebooting the American Dream, 11 Ways to Rebuild Our Country, Chapter 4, An Informed and Educated Electorate. It opens with a quote from Thomas Jefferson. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. That, whenever things get so far wrong as to attract their notice, they may be relied upon to set them right. Talk Media News Service, based here in Washington, D.C., is owned and run by my dear friend Ellen Ratner. Ellen is an experienced and accomplished journalist, and a large number of interns and young journalism school graduates get their feet wet in reporting by working with and for her. In March of 2010, I was in Washington for a meeting with a group of senators, and I needed a studio from which to do my radio and TV show. Ellen was gracious enough to offer me hers. I arrived as three of her interns were producing a panel discussion type of TV show for web distribution at talkmedianews.com, in which they were discussing their viewing audience, their recent experiences on Capitol Hill. One intern panelist related that a White House correspondent for one of the big three networks had told her that the network registered a huge amount of interest in a hot story that week of a congressman's sexual indiscretions. Far less popular were stories about the debates on health care, the conflicts in the Middle East, and even the Americans who had recently died in Iraq or Afghanistan. Quote, so that's the story they have to run with on the news, end quote, the intern said, relating the substance of the network correspondent's thoughts, because that's what the American people want to see. If the network doesn't give people what they want to see, viewers will tune away. The network won't get any ratings or revenues or viewers. The other two interns commiserated with the first about what a shame it was that Americans wanted the titillating stories instead of the substantive ones, but they accepted without question that the network was therefore obligated to give people what they want. When they finished their panel discussion, I asked these college students if they knew that there was a time in America when radio and television stations and networks broadcast the actual news instead of infotainment because the law required them to. None of them had any idea what I was talking about. They were mystified. Why would a station or network broadcast programs that were not popular or not what people wanted? But the reality is that from the 1920s, when radio really started to go big in the United States, until Reagan rolled it back in 1987, federal communications law required a certain amount of public service programming from radio and television stations as a condition of retaining their broadcast licenses. The agreement was basic and simple. In exchange for the media owners being granted an exclusive license from the Federal Communications Commission to use the airwaves owned by the public, they had to serve the public interest first. And only then could they go about the business of making money with the rest of their programming throughout the day. If they didn't do so, if they didn't serve the public interest, when it came time to renew their license, public groups and individuals could show up at a public hearing on the license renewal and argue for the license being denied. One small way the stations lived up to their public service mandate was by airing public service announcements, PSAs, for local nonprofit groups and community events and charitable causes. But they also had to abide by something called the Fairness Doctrine, which required them to air diverse points of view on controversial issues. Separately, during election campaigns, broadcasters had to abide by the equal time rule, which required them to provide equal airtime to rival candidates during an election. But the biggest way they proved that they were providing a public service and meeting the requirements of the Fairness Doctrine was by broadcasting the news, real news, actual news, local, national, and international news produced by professional old-school journalists. Because the news didn't draw huge ratings like entertainment shows, although tens of millions of Americans did watch it every night on TV and listen to it at the top of the hour on radio from coast to coast, And because real news is expensive to produce, with bureaus and correspondents all over the world, news was a money loser for the big three TV networks and for most local and radio and TV stations. But it was such a sacred thing. That is, after all, the keystone that held together the station's license to broadcast and thus to do business. It didn't matter if the news lost money. It made all the other money-making things possible. Through much of the early 1970s, I worked in the newsroom of a radio station in Lansing, Michigan. It had been started and was then run by three local guys, an engineer, a salesman, and a radio broadcaster. They split up the responsibilities like you would expect, and all were around the building most days and would hang out from time to time with the on-air crew, all except the sales guy. I was forbidden from talking with him because I worked in news. There could be no hint, ever, anywhere, that our radio station had violated the FCC's programming in the public interest mandate by, for example, by going easy on an advertiser in a news story or promoting another advertiser in a different story. News had to be news, separate from profit and revenue, and if it wasn't, I'd be fired on the spot. News, in other words, was not part of the free market. It was part of our nation's intellectual commons, and thus the price of the station's license. After Reagan blew up the fairness doctrine in 1987, two very interesting things happened. The first was the rise of right-wing hate speech talk radio, starting with Rush Limbaugh that very year. The second, which really stepped up fast after President Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which further deregulated the broadcast industry, was that the money-losing news divisions of the big three TV networks were taken out of the wings of their entertainment divisions and wrung dry. Foreign bureaus were closed, reporters were fired, stories that promoted the wonders of advertisers or other countries like big movie production houses owned by the same mega corporations that own the networks began to appear, and investigative journalism that cast a bright light on corporate malfeasance vanished. So the chapter is an informed and educated electorate. It's about our media in rebooting the American dream. To separate
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us, Dr. Mark Bray, historian and visiting scholar at Dartmouth College, organizer, author of several books. The latest, Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook. His website, markmbray.wordpress.com. You can tweet him at mark__Bray, B-R-A-Y. Dr. Bray, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Sure. Since we talked last, there has been, well, in fact, I have a piece on Alternet up just a couple hours ago about how, you know, this is an old movie demonizing the protesters on the left. You know, it was done to us in the SDS back in the 60s. It was done by the Nazis very aggressively in the 30s. It seems like we're seeing it all over again. And I was just trying to warn Antifa people to say, look out. You know, you're going to be painted with this brush. Your thoughts?
Certainly, yeah. The thing is that reasonable people can disagree about tactics and protest strategies, but regardless of what you do, there's always going to be an effort to divide resistance among the sort of good protesters and bad protesters. Even back, you know, during Occupy Wall Street in 2011, marching in the street was seen as some sort of, you know, incredibly rowdy spectacle, which of course pales in comparison to the stakes of the conversation today. So think instead, I think, in terms of solidarity against fascism, solidarity towards building a better future, and not fall into these divides, even if we disagree on how to go about doing this.
Right. So what's the, you know, I've been talking about this a lot on the air here in the last couple of weeks, and there seems to be a general confusion about who are the guys dressed in black who are running around smashing windows and think that that's the tactic that's going to save the republic, versus who are the people who are standing up to the fascists. And at what point is there overlap between the two? And at what point do the groups oppose each other? You know, elucidate.
Right. So whenever you see a group of people doing something, chances are there are people involved in a variety of different groups and projects. Antifa groups are a small fraction of the larger anti-racist movement that's standing up to the alt-right and Trump today. Certainly part of the anti-fascist repertoire includes dressing up in black and participating in black bloc tactics to confront fascism or other kinds of political opponents. But much of what anti-fascists do has to do with really research, investigating who white supremacists are, what groups they organize with, sometimes alerting their neighbors or employers to let them know about who these people are, leveraging public opinion to try and make it unbearable to be a Nazi or a white supremacist. So what the media sees is sort of a small tip of the iceberg of the larger whole that is anti-fascist organizing. And certainly property destruction is sometimes part of the repertoire because ultimately this is an illiberal politics of social revolution applied to fighting the far right. And in times that involves property destruction. But of course, that's not in the same conversation as the white supremacists who murdered Heather Heyer and other people.
Well, I remember this debate in the 60s. In fact, it got pretty heated, particularly, among the Trotskyites and the Marxists and all the different factions that we had at MSU SDS. And one group finally said, no, blowing up buildings, tearing down things, breaking things. We're going to try and do it in a way that doesn't kill anybody, but we're going to go right to the heart of power, and we're going to take some of these things down. They split off, became the Weather Underground. One of them, Linda Evans, I think her name was just pardoned by Bill Clinton, toward the end of his term. There was a clear bifurcation there. Most of SDS was absolutely opposed to property destruction and violence. Why is there not such a bifurcation in today's movement?
Well, I mean, certainly there are strong disagreements. Certainly there are parts of the progressive left that condemn all forms of property destruction. But of course, obviously, putting bombs in buildings versus breaking windows is clearly a very different kind of property destruction.
Well, they're part of the same spectrum, though. I mean, destroying property is destroying property.
Nevertheless. But I think that, when we talk about the kind of repercussions of these activities, we can see that, for example, the destruction of property at Berkeley gave universities across the country a very clear excuse to prohibit people like Richard Spencer, the known white supremacist, from coming to visit. They say now it's a security hazard, and so dozens of his talks have been canceled. So it does work. It is an illiberal politics. It is not intended to curry the favor of the majority of the population, but rather to make a specific event untenable. And it worked in the case of Milo. So, we can disagree with that, but I think that we can also see that when Milo speaks, when he targets transgender or undocumented students, that's a kind of violence of a different order.
I don't disagree, but wouldn't it be better to just completely ignore him, let him speak to his little group of right-wing rabble-rousers and let them, run around with their tiki torches and then go home to mom? As opposed to, I would say that it's actually helped him. It's turned him into a media superstar. It got his book on the New York Times bestseller list. Ann Coulter's milking that same gravy train. When we adopt their tactics of violence, that we become them, we help them.
Well, the argument that some people who support this action would make is that the point here is to create a direct action-oriented anti-racist movement that is capable to push back against any manifestation of these kinds of politics. So when these speakers speak, it's not just a matter of their personal fame or celebrity, but that these spaces create organizing hubs for white supremacists and national far right nationalists to organize. We can see that, for example, with the speeches of David Irving, the famed Holocaust denier, whose speeches for many years were hubs for white supremacist organizing. And so the idea is that if you allow this discourse to become normalized, it affects how students and the wider public behave. It leads them sometimes to target the vulnerable. And really, if you were someone who was going to be called out for being undocumented or transgendered at this kind of event, you might think of it a little differently.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I've been the target of police actions and right-wing actions in my life. It just strikes me that, I remember back in 1964, a John Birch Society meeting my dad took me to. There was like 20 guys there, and they were just, this was in Lansing, Michigan. Half of them worked in the factories, and they were just sitting around complaining about the communists in the State Department, and nobody was paying any attention to them. It seems to me, and I mean, maybe my read of history is completely wrong, but those guys have been marginalized for generations. The hard right, the KKK, the Klan, the Nazis, the Richard Spencers, and by getting all blown out of shape and smashing windows, it seems like we're raising their profile tremendously. I mean, you can see, Milo and David Horowitz loves this kind of stuff, and Coulter. They're doing everything they can to try and stir up more of it, and we're just giving it to them. That does not seem to me like a smart tactic.
Well, I mean, the question is, how powerful does the far right have to be before you escalate tactics? So certainly we can see historically that, Mussolini's fascist regime started out with 100 men, that the German Workers' Party, when Hitler first attended his first meeting before it became the Nazi Party, had 54 members. So the anti-fascist argument is that you address these kinds of small groups with the utmost seriousness, knowing that quite often, as you say, if you ignore them, they'll go away, but sometimes they won't. And really, the fact of the matter is that there are going to be a rotating circle of far-right media celebrities, whether it was Bill O'Reilly, whose star has fallen, whether it's Ann Coulter or Milo. There's always going to be a book market for these people. The question is, how do you respond when they try to go from speaking into essentially creating spaces for organizing? And that's the argument in response. But really, people are going to disagree with this. As you said, this has been a debate for decades. I don't see it being resolved anytime soon. So I see the question as, in part, how do different anti-racist factions coexist and try and push in the same direction?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there was a fairly broad consensus, at least back when I was a kid, that the minute you turn to violence, you've lost. Whether it was Dr. King's work, whether it was the SDS work.
Well, there's also the Malcolm X Black Panther approach, right? So
well, he eschewed violence too.
I'm sorry?
Malcolm X was not in favor of violence.
He was in favor of self-defense of marginalized people, sure.
Self-defense is a different thing.
Well, what we're talking about here is, what do you do if there are people trying to organize to exterminate you and your family? Right. We can see historically that, sure, at first when the fascists or Nazis were organizing, there may not have been any imminent threat to Jews or to homosexuals or what have you, but the notion that that kind of politics, if it is allowed to fester, is not a threat is something that anti-fascists would disagree with.
Yeah, I guess the question is, what are the circumstances in which fascism grows?
Right.
And if part of the circumstances under which fascism grows are highly polarized societies, then arguably by playing that game, we're helping grow fascism. On the other hand, if it's something like a lack of economic opportunity, I mean, fascism grew in Europe in the 30s as a consequence of the essentially Great Depression that was not just the worldwide Great Depression, but also the consequences of World War I, and particularly in Germany because they lost World War I. So you've got in the United States, a large portion of the electorate that basically lost to Reaganomics, and they're angry and they're upset, and Bill O'Reilly tells them to blame it on Brown, not Bill O'Reilly specifically, but the right-wing pundits. Blame it on those immigrants, blame it on people of color who want to take your job, and et cetera, et cetera. So wouldn't it be better to, we just have a minute left too, Mark, I'm sorry. Wouldn't it be better to work at solving the causes of this rather than fighting the manifestation of it?
Well, I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, nor do anti-fascists. Certainly the same people you see doing anti-fascist actions are also trade unionists and environmentalists and doing a wide variety of social justice work. I think that the question is, what do you do if there's an immediate threat of white supremacists with baseball bats in your neighborhood? How do you respond? And for, immigrants around Europe and North America, that can be an immediate challenge that needs to be addressed. But as I said, it's a larger structure that requires a broad left response, and hopefully we can solve the problems that make people turn to fascism and defend ourselves and build a new world.
Yeah. I mean, you look at that guy who shot the gun toward the protester in Charlottesville. It took the police a week to arrest him, and that was only because a lot of people, just basically came down on them and said, do it.
Right.
But it seems to me that the police are always going to essentially support right-wing fascists and oppose anti-fascists. I mean, it's just kind of in their DNA.
That's part of the argument that anti-fascists make, that the police cannot be counted upon to reliably counteract the far right. And they've been sympathetic to the law and order appeal of fascism all along.
Yeah. Excellent point. Dr. Mark Bray, historian and visiting scholar at Dartmouth College, organizer and author of several books, including his latest, Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook. markmbray.wordpress.com. You can tweet him at Mark__Bray. Mark, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is an interesting conversation. We can continue it. If you have thoughts on this, give me a shout, or anything else you'd like. We'll be ready. And welcome back. Gloria in Shannon, North Carolina. Hey, Gloria, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to add a little bit on to the conversation about Antifa and their what they do, and what the gentleman said a few minutes ago. That's basically, the group is just like any other group. It's two different. You have the real anti-fascists, and then you have the just plain anarchists that just want to run around and tear up stuff.
Well, they're anti-capitalists, essentially.
Yeah, during the Charlottesville situation, I've looked at videos from all angles, and the situation with the main situation that I saw that nobody is talking about is the ministers when the racists attacked the ministers. That it was Antifa that got between them and the ministers. Right. That got them away from the ministers. And this happened on TV during an interview with the pastor. I think her name was Goodman or Blackman. She worked hand in hand with Bishop Barber. Mm-hmm. And she was on camera doing an interview when they started attacking the ministers, and on Joy Reid's AM morning show. Mm-hmm. And one of them grabbed her and pulled her right out of the way, and then the rest of them they backed them up, got the Klan people away from them. But they got between them, and she told, when she done another interview, she told them, she said, if it hadn't been for them, she don't know what would happen, because the cops was doing nothing. Right. But they were attacking the ministers that were in the church the night before. They had to go through that mess the night before. Yep. So everybody's lumping them together, but all of them are not the same.
Yeah, I agree. And the other concern that I have is I'm wondering what percentage of any particular group of Antifa folks is actually made up of infiltrators from the hard right and infiltrators from the police, who are determined to destroy the thing. I mean, it really concerns me. Gloria, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech in Shannon, North Carolina. Oh, really? Okay. 40 seconds. All right. Gloria, thank you for the call. We had talked about Houston. Actually, there's... where'd it go? Oh, a couple of days ago, I was talking about Texas, and I said, Texas is one of the taker states. I was wrong. Of all the red states that take from the federal government, Texas is the only one that is actually giving to the federal government. They get 94 cents back for every dollar that they send. Just below, and Florida gets 97 cents for every dollar that they send. But, yeah. Oh, oil and gas revenue? Yeah, probably. Yeah. So, anyhow, we'll be back with more of your calls. Stick with me.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
A couple of interesting articles in today's New York Times from the opinion pages. Teres Gresko writing, another good reason to make cities car-free. I remember when we lived in Germany back in the mid-'80s, we used to go to Munich, and all of not all, but a large chunk of downtown Munich has been just blocked off. No cars can go in there. They let the delivery trucks in the morning, and that's it. When we were in Norway, there's parts of Oslo, as I recall, that are like that, and even Tromsø, even this little town that we were at. This is a common thing in Europe, and having pedestrian walkways basically, and turning large chunks of the cities into car-free zones. This is really, I mean, if we're going to live in an era of hardcore right-wing terrorism, where right-wingers and whether they're Al-Qaeda right-wingers or whether they're Christian Taliban right-wingers, racist right-winger, terrorists here in the United States, where terrorists are using cars to kill people in our big cities, let's just get the cars out of the big cities. Everybody can come to town. They can park on the perimeter. They can take public transportation into town. It's like, hey, it should work. The other one that I wanted to point out to you is Sarah Anderson's piece in today's opinion pages, The Myth That Corporate Tax Cuts Mean More Jobs. And she starts out by quoting AT&T's chief executive, Randall Stephenson, who back in May on CNBC said, that he wanted a tax cut for AT&T. And he said for every $1 billion in tax savings, he'd create 7,000 jobs, or 7,000 jobs get created. The implication was that AT&T would too. So Sarah goes on and looks at AT&T and discovers that AT&T enjoyed an effective tax rate of just 8% between 2008 and 2015, despite recording a profit in the United States each year. Despite the enormous savings AT&T has realized, the company has been downsizing. So they're saving money on their taxes. Are they using that to expand or to invest or to hire new people? No. Although it hires thousands of people a year, the company, by our analysis at the Institute for Policy Studies, reduced its total workforce by nearly 80,000 jobs between 2008 and 2006. So they get a tax cut, or they get their taxes way, way down there, and what do? They lay off 80,000 people. So they're reporting huge profits. Are they taking those profits and hiring people? Are they expanding their factories? Are they building production? Are they developing new products? No, the company has also spent $34 billion repurchasing its own stock since 2008. Of course, what does that do? It increases the pay for the senior executives. Period. I mean, that's pretty much it. And then she goes through all these other corporations that are begging for tax breaks that are doing the exact same thing. This is a scam. A scam.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Trump is going to be pitching it in what, Missouri someplace he's going today? Wherever he's going. Springfield, whatever, yeah. It's a scam. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the book Screwed, The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class and What We Can Do About It, a book I wrote in 2006, but is frankly more relevant today than it was back then. Reading from page 11. There's a battle waging today in America that will decide the future of the middle class. On the one side are those like Jefferson who believe that if free people can govern themselves and have the right to organize their government to create a strong middle class, which will in turn keep the government democratic, small d. On the other side are those like Thomas Hobbes, who believe that only a small elite can and should govern, and that the people should be willing to pay the price of poverty in exchange for security. Those who don't want democracy understand that a middle class will always work to create democracy, which is why they are so opposed to middle class creating government policies like free public education, limits to the concentration of ownership in the media, and social safety nets like universal health care and Social Security. They understand that such policies have and always will bring about a strong and vibrant middle class, which will in turn both demand and create a more democratic society, again, small d. Who are these people who want to undermine the middle class? They often call themselves conservatives, but those people are not true conservatives. They don't want to conserve or protect the America the founders gave us. I call them cons because they're conning America. My dad was a staunch Republican all his life, but he didn't believe that a small elite should rule America. He was glad the government provided safety nets like Social Security and Medicare and made unionization possible. My dad and most of the other real conservatives I have known believed in the middle class and believed in democracy. The battle we face in America today is not between liberal and conservative, nor is it between big D Democrat and Republican. The battle we face today is between those who want to protect our democratic heritage, small d, and the cons who want to create an America that benefits only a small elite organized around corporate power and inherited wealth. There are two types of cons who have worked together to screw the middle class. I call them the predator cons and the true believer cons. Predator cons are simply greedy. They use politics and/or philosophy as a cover for their theft of our common resources and as a rationalization for their growing wealth in the face of growing social poverty, societal poverty and inequality. They're not conservatives in any true sense. They are not interested in conserving American values or even in keeping American wealth in America. They're the ones who ship jobs overseas, lobby for tax breaks from Congress, fight against the inheritance tax, and reincorporate their companies offshore to avoid paying U.S. corporate taxes. The predator cons' rationalization for their obscene pileup of wealth is that they're simply playing the game by the existing rules. And that's true to a large extent, except that they're also the ones who bought and paid for the politicians who set up the rules for them. They've conned America into believing that they care about the American economy when all they care about is making money for themselves. A great example of a predatory con is NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. These agreements lower wages for American workers. They do not create well-paying jobs in America. They create record trade deficits. Cons don't even try to argue that free trade agreements are good for America anymore. Arguments like these, such as the Central American Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA, are passed now by a single vote in the Senate in 2005, only because corporate America needs them to reap tremendous profits from the low wages they extract in non-unionized, non-democratic, and socially disorganized countries. Predator cons succeed in passing these agreements by threatening to withhold campaign funds from anyone who dares to oppose them. It's an old game that the robber barons of the 19th century knew well how to play. The second type of con is perhaps even more dangerous than the predators. They're the true believers. Just as true believers in communism brought about the death of tens of millions in Russia from the time of the Bolshevik Revolution until the fall of the Berlin Wall, so too the true believers in laissez-faire capitalism believe that if only government would go away, everything would be just fine. Employers would become benevolent, employees would become enthusiastic, and bureaucratic inefficiencies would just vanish. These so-called free marketers aren't bothered by the consolidation of companies or the loss of competition that happens when markets are unregulated. Like Thomas Hobbes, the true believers assume that society will run best when run by the small elite that ended up on the top. They believe in corporatocracy, the view that an economic aristocracy benefits the working class because wealth will trickle down from above to below. Ronald Reagan was a true believer. He didn't understand economics, and the simple notions of self-sufficiency and a pioneering spirit appealed to him. He asked, in essence, why would somebody want to regulate a business? Wouldn't it eventually always do what is best without regulation? What Reagan and his followers failed to understand was that business will not always do what's best for society. In fact, the fundamental goal of business, to maximize assets and profits while externalizing costs and liabilities, is often destructive to the public good. This becomes particularly obvious when business owners do not live or otherwise participate in the same society and culture as their customers. A small business owner can't run sewage out his door or pay his workers below a living wage because he has to face his next-door neighbor and his next-door neighbor's kid who may want to work in his shop.
Same is not true, however, for multinational corporations. Executives of large corporations don't live in the same society as the people who work for them or who live next door to their factories. As a result, the legacy of unregulated big business and the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few, that legacy is pollution, worker exploitation, cuts to workers' safety, and the bestowing of profits to the company's elite while cutting benefits to the company's rank and file. This is the book Screwed. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, Ivanka Trump was supposed to be the great feminine hope, right? To moderate the White House and represent women and minorities and young people and I don't know what, pretty people or something. Whatever she's supposed to be doing there. She has there is a rule on the books that goes into effect this year, I believe, that says basically that any company that has more than 100 employees must report to the federal government at the end of every year what they pay people of different genders in different job positions. So if you've got bookkeeper 1 is making $20,000 a year, bookkeeper 2 is making $30,000 a year, bookkeeper 3 is making whatever. If you have to attach a gender to those pages, you don't have to name them, but you have to report what you're paying people and what their gender is. And the goal, they're not, is not individual actions. This isn't setting companies up for prosecution. The goal is for all of us to understand what's going on with gender discrimination in the workplace in the United States. Ivanka Trump has come out opposed to this rule. Her father is planning on destroying that rule, and she's saying, "Yeah, go ahead, kill it. We don't need those thinking rules." Oh, amazing. Jonna in Vallejo, California. Am I saying your name right?
Yes, Jonna in Vallejo, California.
Great. What's up?
Oh, well, so I wanted to make the point that the Democrats, they have their new slogan, a better deal.
Mm-hmm.
What it should be save democracy 10-1, because with all of the voter suppression mechanisms in interstate crosscheck, voter ID, corruptible voting machines, the SAFE Act that Mr. Pocan was talking about, that's not going to pass. All of the legal challenges we have in courts against all of this voter suppression, it's not going to be done by 2018. So what the Democrats should be doing is saying, look, if you're going to vote, you got to bring 10 people with you, because 5 of you are not going to be counted. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
So that's just, I wish
this
the Democrats would come out forcefully with this.
Yeah, this is what I think happened in 2008 was, the Republicans stole several million votes nationwide, but, Obama was able to inspire enough people that they're going to steal 3 million votes. We're going to turn up an additional 5 million, that kind of thing. So I agree. I think that we need to be just absolutely overwhelming in the numbers until we can get control of enough power in this country that we can clean up the voting system so it can no longer be corrupted and gamed by the GOP. I'm totally with you. Jonah, thank you very much for the call. Don in Fort Pierce, Florida. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hey, how's it going today?
Good.
I like the opinion of the listeners that we should move the capital of the United States to another state. It's the only way to get the infestation out of Washington, D.C. is clouded with the worst possible humanity has to offer.
Yeah.
And it's about time we move away. Either that or we have a civil war.
Well, if you're concerned about the rats, Troy was telling me this morning that back in the 60s, during the Johnson administration, 1969, Lyndon Johnson put into place a federal program, or Congress put into place a federal program to help cities stop rats, right, to get rid of the rat problem. And Reagan in 1982 did away with that program as, quote, wasteful spending, end quote. And now there's this explosion of rats all across the United States, including here in D.C. Don, I'm guessing, though, that that's not what you're talking about. I think the kind of rats that we need to get rid of are the lobbyist types and the corrupt politician types. And that's a function of the U.S. Supreme Court, which touches every corner of this country. So you can move the Capitol building anywhere, and it would be equally corrupt as long as we have the same Supreme Court written laws regarding corporate personhood and money as speech on the books. It's not going to solve the problem. But I get where you're coming from, and I think it's I applaud your thinking process, Don. Beth in Valparaiso, Indiana. Hey, Beth, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Listen, I have to say some comments about this Antifas guy, this professor who was on with you. It upset me greatly, some of the comments that he made as a nonviolence organizer. And I'm an experienced and successful nonviolence organizer. I've trained hundreds of people in nonviolence techniques before. I've gotten hundreds of people arrested in effective nonviolent actions. And I've been directly involved in stopping a number of polluting facilities, 20 years ago when I was doing that work for a long time.
Well, here's the question, Beth.
Come from, but I just have to say, it's not effective to break windows, property damage, or violence.
I agree. I think it's counterproductive. Actually, I don't even think it's not productive. I think it's anti-productive. It's counterproductive. But here's the question: if what we're seeing in Charlottesville, for example, and all around the country, if what we're seeing is a bunch of frustrated losers who are trying to restore or reassert their masculinity by stomping around with phallic symbols strapped to their backs and saying outrageous things, if that's what we're seeing, then I would say that nonviolent protest and ridicule and there's so many techniques that could be brought to bear if what we're seeing is basically political. On the other hand, if what we're seeing is the actual takeover of the government of the United States by real fascists who at some point will declare the press is no longer free, that you and I no longer have rights of free speech, that would shut down programs like this, that would seize control. If that's what we're seeing, then the question becomes, what would you do it's enough to stand up to the right wing in the UK, for example, where there's, back in the 30s, there were still some people marching around with swastikas on their arms. Well, there were in the United States, too. The German Bund movement was huge in the United States in the 1930s. It's enough to stand up to them here or in the UK. But what would you have done in 1933 in Germany or in Spain or in Italy as these fascist movements were coming to power? What's the point at which your resistance becomes real resistance, becomes, revolutionary Spain kind of resistance? Beth?
Unfortunately, we live in a time and in a time of technology when even regular revolutionary techniques that involve taking up the tactics of a military revolution are no longer possible. They're no longer winnable. We have to fight like Gandhi. That's our only way of fighting, of showing the injustice. We all have cell phones. We've got to keep the internet free, and we've got to suffer for what we want to achieve. Now, I'm going to quote John Lennon. John Lennon said, the reason they poke you in the eye and pull on your beard is because they want to get you violent. Because once they've got you violent, they know precisely how to handle you.
Yep.
Let me tell you, they are experts in the U.S. and British governments at handling violence. So you will be squashed. You will not win the hearts and minds of the taxpayers who have to legislate the changes you want. You will also create a new regime that is just as violent as the one you're replacing. And I really get upset when people are trying to work out their own anger about their suburban upbringing instead of using self-discipline. Read some Martin Luther King. We have to go beyond these guys and keep the moral high ground at all costs. And Europe in 1930s is way different than we are. We teach our children they're free.
Yes and no, Beth. In 1932, 1 million people showed up in Munich, I believe it was, to protest fascism. I mean, it's not like there wasn't a strong anti-fascist movement in Germany before Hitler finally in 1934 shut down all the press and criminalized dissent.
But there were hundreds of years of authoritarian worship. We were the American colonists that were influenced by the Native Americans to really be free. You know what I mean?
Beth, I completely agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah, I know. I don't know, Tom. I understand the frustration because I think what like Malcolm X was trying to say was self-defense. If the man comes for you with something violent, you're going to have to perhaps stand up with at least your body, if not violent.
Right.
But I'm just saying we're going to have to get a lot of people in a spiritual place where they can be arrested, threatened with long prison terms, etc. We're going to have to really stand up, I think, in the next 10 years, or we're going to lose it all.
Yeah.
So
I share your concerns, Beth, and you have done a marvelous job of articulating my position on this, which is that nonviolence is the only way to go, and that violence will always be used against you. This is the crisis that Native Americans faced when they were confronted by violent people from Europe. Was, do you fight them? Because if at the minute that you fight them using their own terms and techniques, you have become them. And the whole point of getting rid of them was to not become them. And so, it's like, number one, do you let them wipe you out? Some Native tribes chose that or had it imposed upon them. Do you run and hide? Some tribes had the luxury of doing that, particularly out west where you had low population densities. It's why the Shoshone are still, largely intact. Or do you fight them using the same technology that they have? And that's what Crazy Horse tried to do. That's what Sitting Bull tried to do. And the consequence of that was that they were destroyed, and their descendants were destroyed generation after generation after generation, and are still functionally in concentration camps in these reservations. So it's like, how do you deal with this? And I agree with you that the moral high ground is the way to do it, that Gandhi and Martin Luther King showed us that. For that matter, Jesus showed us that, if you want to get metaphysical about it. Or even not. I mean, just in practical politics. We're still talking 2,000 years later about a guy who took a political statement. So, Beth, I'm with you. Thank you for the call. And it's, I understand the question. At what point has a movement become a genuine threat to our survival? I just don't think this movement actually represents a genuine threat to our survival yet.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It may be to some individuals, and it may be, harassment at an insanely high level, but survival, not yet. We're back. Yeah, okay. Jimmy in Woodruff, South Carolina. Hey, Jimmy, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Hey, I just wanted to touch on 3 points, 3 quick ones. First, I was reading that one of the principles of free market ideology was that corporations are creatures of the state and therefore must be watched closely by the citizenry due to their propensity to disrupt the natural order. I just want to put that out there for people.
Well, they're things that their creation is authorized by the state. So to that extent, they're creatures of the state, but they're really creatures of capital.
Yeah. Okay. And my second point is I wanted to give people an argument for when people say they don't believe in climate change. I just wanted to let them know they can simply tell them it doesn't matter if they believe in it or not, because our dollars are backed by oil, and as the world continues to use less oil, it's going to affect us negatively.
Okay.
And then my third point was basically, they're basically making Antifa look very bad. They're already calling us the violent left. I had a suggestion that instead of saying white supremacy, we just call them right, R-I-G-H-T supremacy, or right supremacists.
Right.
Because they believe they're infallible, and that's the major issue. And when you call them white supremacists, it strikes a different chord than if you were to just say right supremacy.
Yeah. Or bigots, or fascists, or wimps, or losers.
Exactly.
It's like...
So basically, when you call them right supremacists, it brings them back into the sphere.
Yeah. Yeah, it almost
and they
legitimizes.
won't be as left out. And then that way we can actually, guilt trip them into thinking that they're better than everyone.
Yeah, got it. It's a good one. Jimmy, thank you. Thank you for your 3 topics. Ben in Pinos Altos, New Mexico, if I'm saying that right. Ben, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Appreciate talking to you. I was listening to the program, and you had Representative Pocan on.
Right.
Like that. And one of your listeners put a direct question to him about the FCC change in law in 1996 or something like that, where it became okay to own multiple news stations.
Yeah, this was the Telecommunications Act of 1996.
Kind of and Pocan kind of skirted the question a little bit. It's like it wasn't important.
Well, the fellow alleged that law ended freedom of the press in the United States, and that was not what it did, and it's not what it said. So I think that he was.
Didn't it allow them people to own a whole bunch of stations?
Yes, it allowed for more media consolidation.
Okay,
and that was the guy's point.
I'm wrong, but what should have been addressed there, I think, is the biggest problem you have in this country is all the BS news you get. It's partly the truth, but it's not the basis of what really the problem is. And I read both of your books, Screwed and another one, Unequal Protection, and it really opened my eyes. And we have there's a syndicate called Sinclair, I believe, that's buying up a whole bunch of.
Yeah, they're going to own TV stations that'll reach 74% of the American public, which would have been illegal before. By the way, it wasn't just the Telecommunications Act. There have been dozens of rule changes done at the level of the FCC. Many of them during the Clinton administration and the last Bush administration, that also eased the rules on ownership. And of course, Trump is doing one right now to allow Sinclair to own more stations. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This is interesting. Our show is becoming a conversation of the desirability or undesirability, viability or non-viability, usefulness or non-usefulness of violence or black bloc techniques as, at least property violence, as a strategy against fascism. I'm personally opposed to it, but anyhow. Scott in Alameda, California. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Hey, Tom, this has been one of my centers of focus for years regarding Black Bloc. They are definitely infiltrated. I want all of your listeners to go to a video, and it's called Montebello SPP Protest. And this is a protest in Canada on the SPP treaty negotiations, where a bunch of trade unionists were at a protest, and these Black Bloc guys come in, and they are immediately recognized by the older guys, the old graybeards, as provocateurs, and they force them into a corner, and they won't let them cause a problem. And the police go in and extract them, and the one thing that's notable is they kind of have the same equipment as the police. And this was one of the big tells of the Black Bloc movement, is they had the same equipment as the police. The other thing is the G20 Pittsburgh protest. There's one video of a very hectic scene where something's happening and people are rushing around, and what's happening is the undercover police are going in to extract Black Bloc people out of the group and get them to safety, and they make a cordon around these people. In other words, it's not a police takedown, it's a cordon around them to extract them.
They're rescuing their own infiltrators.
And then there's a third thing with this G20, where a police car was abandoned in the middle of an intersection, and Black Bloc descended on it and burned it and, destroyed this police car. And people went after and looked at the police car, and all of the equipment had been taken out of the car. So it's obvious. Black Bloc is infiltrated. Everybody needs to understand this. Anytime you see this violence from the left, into this Antifa, Black Bloc, the very first thing you have to say is, who benefits? Why is this happening? Who's using the information from this violence to promote their agenda? It does not help the left to have people committing violence on the left. And that brings up one other point about Charlottesville. If you notice on that Saturday, the very first scrum that happened there was a group of protesters, and there was a mix of them. It was the left. Okay, so there was some Antifa people in there, and there was a whole bunch of other people. And The right came down the street, and they were confronted with this group where they couldn't move forward anymore, and then the right immediately charged at them, and the left defended themselves. Now, you cannot say that a person at a peaceful protest who is suddenly attacked from the right doesn't have the right to protect themselves. But one thing you do not want is to have people hiding their identities. Why does Antifa hide their identity? It enrages me. Every time I see these clowns in these identity cloaks, in these, and I understand it's because they don't want to have any kind of police action against them later in regards to law violations that are
right, which is a fuzzy dream, because the cops are catching them before they show up at the rally. They're catching them as they go home from the rally.
Take the masks off.
Yeah, I agree.
Do not. Yeah, that's all I had to say.
Yeah, if you believe in your
Montebello SPP protest, pass it around. Everybody needs to watch it. It's fascinating.
Montebello, Montebello. Say it again.
Montebello, Montebello.
Oh, Nate just found it. Okay, we've got the video. Scott, thank you very much for that. I'll check it out when we get off the air. Tony in Shirley, New York. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you this afternoon?
Great, but I'll get better. What's up?
Oh, just a few things. I was curious regarding the relief in Houston. Now, although I don't mind any of my constituents voting in favor of any relief, despite the fact that Ted Cruz, Senator Cornyn, and all of the other individuals representing Texas voted against Sandy relief.
Right, and they're now lying about the reason why they did. Yes.
Oh, of course. That I found comical, at the very least. Yeah. But that being said, my personal feelings regarding this is, why do we not attach an agenda stating that we will vote for any fund allocations that Houston requires based upon the reimplementation of the Obama 2015 plan, and I believe that was regarding EPA infrastructure, as long as these buildings were, if I recall correctly, I'm trying to recall the term, climate resilient.
Yes. Yeah. The rule that President Obama put into place was that if you get wiped out by a natural disaster that might have been fueled by climate change, you have to, when you rebuild, you have to consider either the latest climate change science and what it is saying, or you have to build to, as I recall, 3 feet above the 100-foot level and 5 feet above the 500-foot level, or something like that. Cool. And this rule was taken down 2 weeks ago by Donald Trump. So I'm with you. By the way, you mentioned Houston, Tony. The hashtag Houston Strong on Twitter today. This physician, Mary Brandt, she said, for the last few days, I've been part of the amazing ride-out crew of doctors, nurses, and support staff at Children's Hospital. She says, since I live in Houston, I've been asked by many in person on Twitter what they can do to help. And she lists a bunch of really good groups to, if you want to send some money to Houston. And I'll just read them. You can plug any of them into a search engine. The Houston Food Bank. There's an organization in Houston that provides urban farmland for refugees to grow food for themselves and to sell. It's called Plant It Forward. There's the Texas Diaper Bank, which is badly needed by low-income people there. There's the Houston Coalition for the Homeless and the Houston Humane Society. And these are all groups that you can donate directly to. And, more of your money is going to end up on the ground, as it were. Tony, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. And thanks for listening to us there in Shirley. We'll be back. We're going to, let's see. Charles Sauer. That's right. Charles Sauer is going to be with us right after the break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Jane Mayer's new book, Dark Money, the history of the billionaires behind the rise of the radical right. And it's, by the way, just an extraordinary, astonishing book. This is from chapter 19, sort of the introductory chapter. And she's talking about one of the Koch summits where all these billionaires get together and plan strategy and throw money into the pot and that kind of thing. The highlight of the Koch summit in 2009 was, which, by the way, was the year President Obama's first year in office, was an uninhibited debate about what conservatives should do next in the face of their electoral defeat. As the donors and other guests dined in the hotel's banquet room like Roman senators attending a gladiator duel in the Forum, they watched a passionate argument unfold that encapsulated the stark choice ahead. Sitting on one side of the stage facing the participants was the Texas Senator John Cornyn, the head of the National Republican Senatorial Committee and former Justice on the Texas Supreme Court. Poised on the other side of the moderator was the South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint, a conservative provocateur who defined the outermost anti-establishment fringe of the Republican Party and who, in the words of one admirer, was the leader of the Huns. 57 at the time, he was 5 months older than Cornyn, but his dark hair, lean build, and more casual aw-shucks style made him appear years younger. Before his election to Congress, DeMint had run an advertising agency in South Carolina. He understood how to sell, and what he was pitching that night was an approach to politics that, according to the historian Sean Willits, would have been recognizable to DeMint's forebearers in the Palmetto State as akin to the radical nullification of federal power advocated in the 1860s by the Confederate secessionist John C. Calhoun. The two Republican senators had been at loggerheads for some time. That night, they gave opposing opening statements. Cornyn spoke in favor of the Republican Party fighting its way back to victory by broadening its appeal to a wider swath of voters, including moderates. In contrast, DeMint portrayed compromise as surrender. He had little patience for the slow-moving process of constitutional government. He regarded many of his Senate colleagues as timid and self-serving. The federal government posed such a dire threat to the dynamism of the American economy, in his view, that anything less than all-out war on regulations and spending was a cop-out. DeMint was the face of a new kind of extremism, and he spoke that evening in favor of purifying rather than diluting the Republican Party. He argued that he would rather have 30 Republicans who believed in something than a majority who believed in nothing, a line that was a mantra for him and that brought cheers and applause from the gathered onlookers. Rather than compromising their principles and working with the new administration, the Obama administration, DeMint argued, Republicans needed to take a firm stand against Obama, waging a campaign of massive resistance and obstruction regardless of the 2008 election outcome. Then they go through a discussion about how they debated, the TARP, and DeMint had voted against it, Cornyn for it, and, some of the just issue things. Sitting silently at a table in the front row through all this were Charles Koch and his wife, Liz. No one came to Cornyn's defense. It was widely assumed that the Kochs, as hardcore free market enthusiasts, had opposed the huge government bailout to the private sector. Later, many reporters assumed this too, ascribing the Kochs' opposition to Obama as stemming from a principled disagreement over issues such as the TARP bailouts. But none of this was true. Had people checked the records, they would have found it quite revealing. At first, the Kochs political organization, Americans for Prosperity, had in fact taken what appeared to be a principled libertarian position against the bank bailouts. But the organization quickly and quietly reversed sides when the bottom began to fall out of the stock market, threatening the Kochs' own vast investment portfolio. The market had begun to collapse on Monday, September 29, when, in the face of heavy opposition from conservatives, the House unexpectedly failed to pass a federal rescue plan. By the end of the day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had fallen 777 points, losing 6.9% of its value. It was the stock market's largest one-day drop ever. Although some conservative groups and politicians such as DeMint still oppose the bailout, the market panic was enough to change many minds. And among those who flipped during the next 48 hours were the Kochs. But if the Kochs' personal interest in protecting their portfolio had trumped their free market principles, they weren't about to mention it in front of a group full of libertarians whose cash they wanted to combat Obama. Instead, the sentiment among the donors, as the first Koch seminar of the Obama era came to an end, was, as one witness put it, like a bunch of gorillas beating their chests. After hearing both sides out, the assembled guests chose the path of extremism. The Kochs had already concluded that they would need to resort to extraordinary political measures to achieve their goals. A few days before the January 2009 donor seminar, Charles and David Koch had privately weighed their options with their longtime political strategist in a meeting inside the black glass fortress that served as Koch Industries' corporate headquarters in Wichita, Kansas. Advisors to Obama later acknowledged he had no inkling of what he was up against. He had campaigned as a partisan politician who had idealistically taken issue with those who liked to slice and dice our country into red and blue states. His vision, like his own racial blend and geographic heredity, was one of reconciliation, not division. The sentiment was laudable, but alas, wishful thinking. The newly sworn-in president looked down at the ground directly beneath his polished shoes. The book Dark Money by Jane Mayer. The book is
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And in the studio with us is Charles Sauer, libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute, marketinstitute.org. His Twitter handle is Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. Charles, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So in Texas right now, the Republican Texas Attorney General is threatening to prosecute stores and pretty much any other kind of business that are engaged in price gouging based on a natural disaster. It's a $20,000 fine if you do it against a normal person, and it's a $250,000 fine if you do price gouging against somebody who's over 65. So this is like very un-libertarian. I mean, it seems to me that the libertarian worldview would be, hey, you know, if the demand in town is for 1 million bottles of water and the water is selling for $1 a bottle, and suddenly there's only 500,000 bottles of water, every bottle of water is worth $2. If there's only 250,000 bottles of water, so every bottle of water is worth $4. Yep. That what disasters do is they simply, you know, interact with the marketplace, and price gouging is not price gouging. It is a perfectly normal thing.
We care about people, Tom. We want the people that are thirsty to have it instead of the people that need to refill their fish bowls with bottled water.
So you're saying that asking people who don't have 2 pennies to rub together, just lost everything, just got wiped out, their home is gone, they can't pay their bills, they're going to be homeless probably, you know, for years, they're just devastated, that saying to that person, you know, you're going to have to pay $40 for that bottle of water, which you may not make it through the night without, because I don't want you pouring it into your fishbowl? Seriously?
Well, I'm saying that the government forcing the small business owner what price he should charge for something and holding a fine over his head if he forgets in the middle of a flooded storm to check somebody's ID to see if they're 65 or older before he gets
you can't price gouge people under 65 either.
Yeah, but he might be able to make it up if he's charging the right amount of money for his water. I mean, the fact is...
So if he charges $25,000 for the bottle of water and he gets hit with a $20,000 fine, he just made a $5,000 profit and just paid the cost of doing business. Is that what you're saying?
The thing is, and why price gouging doesn't actually exist, right? There's no such thing. It's only price gouging when the left decides what moral state it's going to be.
Except this is not the left. This is the Republican Party of Texas. No, this is the Republican Attorney General of Texas. In fact, the Republican Attorney General of Texas said, and I quote, selling or leasing, no, that's the law, excuse me. Let me find the place in the article where.
There's a Republican Attorney General of Kansas that was actually somebody who went to law school with my father that I wrote letters to on regarding price gouging because he was actually pursuing it in Kansas.
Here's what AG Ken Paxton said. He said, we're going to find you, price gougers. Once we find you, we are going to pursue you. So stop. It's better to be stopped than to be found out. So this
power corrupts. This is one of the things that an attorney general has as his power, and one of the stepping stones to governor or to senator or to something with more power is attorney general. So you have a huge public crisis like this. It becomes very popular for somebody to take their power and their position and exert it. And that's how he believes. And I think all of the Republican attorney generals that pursue price gouging are woefully underinformed on the economic situation behind prices and what sets a price, but also what the long-term effects of what they're doing is going to be. I mean, look, this happened in Katrina. Rich people were doing normal fixes on their houses when poor people still had holes in their roofs and weren't able to find lumber to fix them because the supplies weren't able to get back in there. If you're able to actually increase the prices to where the market will hold, then people can get the people that demand it high enough can get the supplies they need. It holds the supply where it's supposed to be.
So your argument is that basically only the rich need survive. To hell with poor people.
No,
I'm almost speechless. I mean, it's just I'm astonished that you would support a capitalist. These aren't even capitalists in some cases. Many of them are just entrepreneurs or whatever. You would support a predator basically lining their pockets on the back of people who are experiencing a horrible disaster. I think most people have more morality than that, Charles.
I find it confounding.
They don't subscribe to these amoral libertarian theologies.
You can't out-moral me on this because the fight that you're making is so that the rich person, so that the top 1% can easily and cheaply buy the water that it takes to put in their fishbowl or to flush their toilet. And the morality of that versus having water where a family might be able to feed their daughters and their kids is not. That's not the moral world that I want to live in. I want to live in the moral world where we can get water to.
That's a straw man argument, Charles. If a store, if they can't engage in price gouging and they have a certain amount of water, they're not going to say to the first person who walks in the door and says, "I'll take 40 of those because I want to flush my toilet and do my fish tank," and realizing you only have 45 of them and then walk. No, they're going to say you can have one.
Look, we know where the moral case on this, and the straw man being made here is by you. The actual case here and the facts behind this are that the government didn't want price gougers in the flood insurance market. So what happened? The government came in and not only mandated a price, they took over the flood insurance market, and they're charging below prices for flood insurance. And so now we've had an increase of people in the floodplains. That's a completely different
argument.
No, it's not. That's what happened. The government says people were price gouging on flood insurance.
No, it had nothing.
That's the exact argument we're doing. I've got the moral high ground here. You're not going to take
it. I don't disagree with you about the flood insurance. The federal government's supporting flood insurance is causing mostly wealthy people. The vast majority of the flood insurance that's been used is people who have coastal properties and coastal properties.
John Stossel is a good example. He's had several houses replaced.
Yeah, so you're talking, multi-$100,000 or multi-million-dollar mansions and things like that are supported by flood insurance. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are wiped out and they need water. And they go to the local store, and this local store is saying, the water that yesterday was $1 a bottle is now $40 a bottle. Do you have your $40? And the people say no, and it's like tough luck, Charlie.
Those people were wiped out for the same policies They're wiped out because of price-setting policies of big government.
They were wiped out
that's
because
what you
the
want to
fossil
say.
fuel industry has been lying to us for 4 decades about what they know about climate change. And you've got
now I know I just won because we just reverted from flood insurance and price gouging to fossil fuels.
They were wiped out
That's
by a
when
storm.
I win.
They were wiped out by a storm, and that storm was fueled by global warming. Absolutely. But again, that's not the point or the debate either. The debate is, what do you do about price gouging? And you're saying you do nothing about it, and I'm saying that's insanely immoral. The purpose of a government is to provide for the general welfare of its citizens.
No, we just saw you define the morality again. I mean, the fact is you can't unstraw man the straw man. The basic argument here is that government set the prices too low on flood insurance, so people moved in. That's government price setting. And what you're saying is now government should price set here for the water. Well, now what happens? What if the person buys the water from
government should set the price
Tom,
for the water.
Let's continue down this road.
I'm saying stay with the marketplace. Whatever the price for the water was, that's the price for the water is.
The marketplace is only going to be defined in the end by the government, and because the marketplace only defines prices by supply and demand. So the fact is so now let's continue this. So now the store can't price gouge. So the rich person buys the water in the store to fill up their fish tank or their toilet. But they get back to their neighborhood and somebody actually needs the water there. And they can't sell it to them because now you're going to consider that price gouging.
Not for $100.
It doesn't stop. I mean, that's the point is once you
price gouging doesn't stop.
It keeps the waste going.
No, I'm not a fan of wage and price controls. Nixon tried that in the 70s. It didn't work.
This is a wage and price control.
This is preventing people from behaving like predators when their friends and neighbors are in distress.
By controlling the price.
That
is the definition of price
by leaving the price where the market had set it.
Under distress, every time we talk about an issue, there's some group or something that's under stress. And so we're only talking about the stress is defined by the left in this case. And so, I mean, you're going to move price gouging into
you're not even acknowledging stress. You're saying, well, if somebody's dehydrated, if their 3-year-old child is about to die from thirst and they don't have the $50 for the bottle of water.
I'm fully acknowledging stress. That's why I want markets to dictate the price.
All right. Charles Sauer.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You can tweet him at Charles Sauer, SAUER. The website is marketinstitute.org. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
We'll be back. And welcome back. Oh, let's see here. Marta in Big Bear Lake, California, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Marta, what's up?
Well, I'm so interested in the nonviolent civil disobedience, but I'm also a media scholar and former journalist. And what gets me is that if 1% of the protesters are, kids or young people that basically engage in smashing windows, that's all the media is going to cover. And in fact, they won't even show up to nonviolent protests. And so one instance of that was a protest against the Iraq War. And the media covered a few people that engaged with the police in kind of like a push and pull situation. And I called up the local ABC news station, spoke with the news producer, and talked to him about this. And, he kind of defended their coverage. And I said, that was a few people that were pushing and shoving. Meanwhile, Desmond Tutu was speaking at that protest, and you did not even cover him. And the news producer just stopped and took a few seconds, and he said, you're right. So I think that we have to always keep repeating over and over again, that this is a very small percent. Now, it's such a complex subject. I agree that nonviolent civil disobedience is the only way. But people who are going to preach that, they might consider that so many nonviolent civil disobedience activists have put their bodies on the line, and there has been, a lot of success, but we don't even know about it half the time. For example, the protesters who were working to stop the largest nuclear waste dump in the United States, which was going to go on the Mojave Indian Reservation in California, 16 miles from the Colorado River, on top of an earthquake fault. Bill Clinton and Dianne Feinstein were pushing it through. This is my recollection. These activists lay down in front of the bulldozers, and they stopped it, along with the Native Americans. So that was one instance. Now, Judy Berry, who was an activist and nonviolent trainer for Earth First, was going to do trainings in nonviolence, and a bomb exploded under her car. While she lay on the street, within minutes, the Oakland police arrested her for blowing herself up.
I remember.
They never investigated the number of death threats she was getting, and she knew who the people were, and she had already called the police. They never even the FBI never even investigated the death threats against her, and she almost died. So, we've got now the Lakota Indians, the Wounded Knee Massacre. Those Indians were dancing the nonviolent ghost dance, and they were massacred. My understanding of the Shoshone is that they've had like 1,000 nuclear bombs, tested on their land in Nevada.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know if it's 1,000, but it's been a bunch. Marta, we're out of time, but thank you. That was quite a list and a very well put together one. Thank you very much for calling. Thanks for watching. We'll be right back. What I like about Harry's is their amazingly high quality.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Here with you, and Muwada in Ashbury Park, New Jersey. Hey, Muwada, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? I just want to let you know I've been listening to your show for many years, and you have good subjects. But I just want to weigh in on this whole thing about violence versus self-defense.
Right.
And I want to, in the whole thing, I want to clear that I'm a Vietnam vet. I was also part of the original BLM, Black Liberation Movement, back in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And I feel that the system itself, the violence of capitalism, which brings on white supremacy, food and medical lack of, and education in the black community and people of color, that's violence in itself. And I think, I believe violence brings violence. At the same time, too many of our people that are talking about, anti-fascism, anti-Nazi, to them, it's kind of, especially some of the white left, is like a luxury to them. But we as black people live it every day in our communities, from whether it's police brutality or, as I said, lack of food, good medical education, stuff like that. So it's about, in our sense, it's about self-defense, and it's about destroying something that has, from this time we've been in this country, been about, violence and terrorism against us. So I'm not an anti-violence person. I believe in self-defense, and I think that's where a lot of us activists in the black community come from with that.
I absolutely understand, Wada. Let me ask you a question. If the marchers at the Edmund Pettus Bridge back in 1960, what year was that? 65, wasn't it, as I recall?
Right, I think so. Right.
Yeah. If the marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the African Americans who had come out of Selma, if they had gone to that march wearing helmets and carrying baseball bats, and when the police attacked them and beat them, they fought back and beat some cops. And, you know, there was also a bunch of city folk there who were wailing on them. If they had fought back and cracked some heads and thrown a few people into the river and given as good as they got, what would the media coverage have said about them?
Oh, yeah, I agree. The media is biased, and the media will Wednesday that was a riot. But that's the same thing they talked about us when we had rebellions in Newark.
Right. Instead of the media be talking about the violence of the institution of policing in Alabama, they would be talking instead about, you know, both sides are at fault. You know, it was a riot, the word you used, Mwata. And instead of saying, look at how shockingly violent this white power structure is.
Yeah.
And so I acknowledge, I'd be the first to acknowledge, I've written books about it, about, you know, how there's a violence that is endemic to capitalism and to, frankly, our form of government to a large extent. And it's a very real violence, and that violence has traditionally been directed against women and people of color, and you know, by white men, and continues to be, for that matter. But the question is then, what do you do about that violence? Do you, quote, defend yourself and fight back against it? Or do you allow it to be demonstrated to the world in all its horror? You know, the death of Heather Heyer is the tragic death of Heather Heyer, which I would never, you know, wish on anybody. But here was a nonviolent anti-fascist who was murdered by you know, a fellow who had violence and hate in his heart. And that caused us all to wake up and say, whoa, look at that. But if after he had hit her, if somebody else's car had hit him and he had died, where would we be?
I agree. Well, all I would say to that is, Tom, that's why I think we really need to form a broad, united front against fascism, racism, and its things in America here. And that broad front has to have many ends of strategy, from, like, you know, community self-defense, first of all, of course, and then also, you know, other means, you know, political, you know, civil disobedience, a lot of things that we took from the civil rights era. But I think it can be a one type of strategy, because you're talking about a system, like, as you say, that is very violent against all these people. So you need a broad strategy to combat it.
But then what do you do, Mwata, when some of the people who are on your side, if you're committed to nonviolence, if some of the people on your side are committed to responding to violence with violence, and they're standing next to you? What do you do?
All right. That becomes a problem. But that's why a broad united front, you have a set of principles. And people that are in that front, they have...
But my argument is that the violence is always going to be the thing that floats to the top. It's always going to be the thing that, quote, wins. It's always going to be the thing that gets reported on. It's always going to be the thing that gets reacted to. It's going to be the thing that laws get passed in response to, and not in a good way. And
that's why we need, I agree, and that's the problem with the corporate media. That's why we need more media like you that's going to bring out what's really going on in democracy now, because we got to tell our own story, because we can't rely and react to what the media does. I just think we have to have a broad strategy, because Nazism, fascism, you know, like my grandfather fought against Nazism in Germany, you know what I mean? We can't allow this to happen here, and that's all I'm trying to say.
No, I'm with you on that. You know, my dad joined the Army hoping to fight fascists too, although the war ended while he was in boot camp. But I get it. Mwata, thank you for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016. This is page 34. Prior to this, we've set up how conservatives saw the 60s as a time of great social chaos and the rise of Ralph Nader and Rachel Carlson and whole consumer and environmental movements as threats to profitability and business, and they had to do something about it. So page 34.
Lewis F. Powell Jr. was just sitting down to breakfast in his suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City when he received a call from the White House. The year was 1971, more than 40 years since the last great crash. The 60s had ended and the Vietnam War had destroyed the Democratic Party, leaving Richard Nixon as President of the United States. And Nixon needed a favor. A thin, ascetic man with wispy hair and fragile features, Lewis Powell had ancestral roots in America's first European settlement, Jamestown, and a lifetime of participation in the law. He deeply loved his Richmond, Virginia home and the law practice he had there, which mostly consisted of defending corporate interests and wealthy Southern white men. He walked comfortably, often in crepe-soled shoes, dressed as a Southern gentleman, and spoke so softly that people sometimes leaned forward to listen. But when he spoke, his words were precise, well-measured, and carefully considered. He was one of the most brilliant jurists of his day, and so it's no surprise that the Nixon White House was considering him for a seat on the Supreme Court, a job he turned down at first. But then when Nixon called him again at the Waldorf Astoria, he reluctantly accepted. As a Supreme Court justice, Lewis Powell was very much the moderate, and his legacy on the High Court would reflect his balanced and authentic interpretation of the rule of law in America. However, just a few months before he was nominated by Nixon, Powell had written a memo to his good friend Eugene Sindor, Jr., the director of the United States Chamber of Commerce at the time. And Powell's most indelible mark on our nation was not to be his 15-year tenure as a Supreme Court justice, but instead that memo, which served as a declaration of war, a war by the economic royalists against both democracy and what they saw as an overgrown middle class. It would be a final war, a bella omnium contra omnis, against everything the New Deal and the Great Society had accomplished. It wasn't until September 1972, 10 months after the Senate confirmed Powell, that the public first found out about the Powell memo. The actual document had the word confidential stamped on it, a sign that Powell himself hoped it would never see daylight outside of the rarefied circles of his rich friends. By then, however, it had already found its way to the desks of CEOs all across the nation and was, with millions in corporate and billionaire money, already being turned into real actions, policies, and institutions. During its investigation into Powell as part of the nomination process, the FBI never found the memo, but investigative journalist Jack Anderson did, and he exposed it in a September 28, 1972 column titled, "Powell's Lessons to Business Aired." Anderson wrote, shortly before his appointment to the Supreme Court, Justice Lewis F. Powell Jr. urged business leaders in a confidential memo to use the courts as a social, economic, and political instrument. Pointing out that the memo wasn't discovered until after Powell was confirmed by the Senate, Anderson wrote, senators never got a chance to ask Powell whether he might use his position on the Supreme Court to put his ideas into practice and to influence the court on behalf of business interests. This was an explosive charge being leveled at the nation's rookie Supreme Court justice, a man entrusted with interpreting our nation's laws with absolute impartiality. But Jack Anderson was no stranger to taking on American authority and no stranger to the consequences of his journalism. He'd exposed scandals from the Truman, Eisenhower, Nixon, and later the Reagan administrations. He was a true investigative journalist. In his report on the memo, Anderson wrote, Powell recommended a militant political action program ranging from the courts to the campuses. Powell's memo was both a direct response to Roosevelt's battle cry decades earlier and a response to the tumult of the 1960s. He wrote, quote, no thoughtful person can question that the American economic system is under broad attack, end quote. When Sindor and the Chamber received the Powell memo, corporations were growing tired of their second-class status in America. Even though the previous 40 years had been a time of great growth and strength for the American economy and America's middle-class workers, and a time of sure and steady increases in profits for corporations, CEOs felt something was missing. If they could only find a way to wiggle back into the people's minds who were just beginning to forget the Royalists' previous exploits in the 1920s that had crashed our economy, then they could get their tax cuts back. They could trash the burdensome regulations that were keeping the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat safe. And the banksters among them could inflate another massive economic bubble to make themselves all mind-bogglingly rich. It could, if done right, be a return to the Roaring '20s. But how could they do this? How could they convince Americans to take another shot at what was widely considered a dangerous free market ideology and economic framework, and that Americans once knew preceded every great crash and war? But Lewis Powell had an answer, and he reached out to the Chamber of Commerce, the hub of corporate power in America, with a strategy. As Powell wrote, strength lies in organization, in careful long-range planning and implementation, in consistency of action over an indefinite period of years, in the scale of financing available only through joint effort, and in the political power available only through unified action and national organizations. Thus, Powell said, the role of the National Chamber of Commerce is therefore vital. And out of the Powell memo came all these think tanks and judicial programs, college campus programs. He reshaped America, and it led directly to the Buckley versus Vallejo decision.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a quick reminder, the Hartmann Report is not only hartmannreport.com, a free news website that basically you'll find all the stories that I'm using for this show there, among other things. But also we have a Hartmann Report podcast now that is free, and it's available over on iTunes. So just an FYI. We were talking about using violence versus nonviolence as a counter-fascist strategy. And one of the folks, I wrote this piece that's over on Alternet right now about how, they're coming for Antifa. They're coming for you, and they're gonna smear them and so on. And somebody wrote a comment to it, and quoting Martin Luther King. And here's what Martin Luther King said: "And so, in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention." So right. So incredibly right. Catherine in Wheatland, Wyoming. Hey, Catherine, what's up?
Hi. I've been, about 15 years ago, I came out of my chicken house. I live rurally, obviously. And there was a strange truck in the yard filled with stuff. And a strange man got out of the truck and said, "Hi, I'm Buzz. I'm a meteorologist from Cheyenne, and I was wondering if you'd like to be a weather station." And I was kind of shocked, so I said, "Well, what do I have to do?" And he said, "Well, they put a bunch of equipment around our property to measure weather, and that I would have to record the weather several times a day and call in anytime there was severe weather." And I said, "Well, oh, yeah." And he said, there's some, added benefits. Sometimes we'll invite you to a class. It's an unpaid position, but we'll invite you to a free
So
class.
wait a minute, didn't the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration used to hire people to do this? Weren't there government employees who checked our weather?
Well, they're still government employees, but they're like around me. There's Casper, Cheyenne, and Boulder.
Uh-huh.
Those and I interact directly with Cheyenne and occasionally Boulder.
Uh-huh.
But there's more than thousands of volunteers like myself.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't realize.
Yeah, and we record the weather, and then there's a computer program that by the end of the month you have to close out, and you put all your weather data on. Mm-hmm. So every day I'm writing a description. Like today, my description is sunny but hazy and breezy.
Right. Fascinating.
Okay.
Catherine, what's the bottom line of your call?
Okay. My meteorologist, Buzz, stopped by to visit me, which he doesn't do very often, about a week ago, to tell me that he and his wife, who's also a meteorologist, have decided that they will retire very shortly, not because they're old, but because they can retire, and NOAA is cutting budgets like crazy.
So they're doing staff buyouts.
Yeah, we'll no longer get our recording books. We'll have to provide our own calendars. We'll still have the website to enter our data.
You still get to volunteer. It's just that the government, your support systems are falling apart. That's amazing. Catherine, these budget cuts are just like, they are so wrong. This is just craziness. Catherine, I have to move along, but thank you for calling and thanks for the heads up on this. This is a terrible situation. Thank you so much. Richard in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind?
Hi. I was calling about the marketplace that we had the libertarian in, and as he was talking, and kind of shrill, but and they believe they found the origin of life in the free market. It's Milton Friedman.
Right.
I have a brother who's the same way.
Or the meaning of life. Yes.
Falls over when he says the free market. It collapses in a pile. Right. But okay, having to do with the price gouging. To me, I define a marketplace as having multiple suppliers and multiple purchasers, right? In what's happening down there, where there's very limited now supplies, you no longer really have competition, which is the essence of a free market, right?
Arguably.
Now, to me, it's kind of an analogy, which I hate, is that it's like a monopoly.
Yep.
In a sense, Now, I would imagine a libertarian that couldn't, like Milton Friedman, couldn't see a monopoly if it ran him over. So I think that's why the guy is fundamentally wrong in this kind of situation. It's more like it is really unconscionable to be ripping people off. I can understand maybe.
Yeah, the monopoly metaphor is an excellent one. I wish I'd thought of it. it's because you're absolutely right, Richard. It's like the whole point of a monopoly is like okay, you've only got one power line coming into your house. You've only got one coax cable coming into your house. You've only got one water line coming into your house, one septic line going out of it. Those are all natural monopolies, and therefore they should be well regulated because they have the power to rip you off. And during a disaster, anybody who has, the essentials of life, shall we say, is essentially a monopolist. That's brilliant. Richard, thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate that. Sanaya in Austin, Texas. Hey, Sanaya, what's up?
Hi. I just wanted to point out that there's so many studies about how an election can change the norms of a society. And it's amazing how after this disaster, we could see, like in your program, people defending price gouging, and we could see people defending neo-Nazis after Charlottesville, and we could see, again, this disaster, people defending that Pastor Osteen, not opening his church. And this is something that we could not see before.
Yep.
And it's just amazing to me how people feel so comfortable to say things that they would not feel comfortable to say, let's say, when we had Sandy hitting our country before.
Yeah.
It's scary to me.
Well said, Sanaya. And yeah, to some extent, actually, the president's behavior is giving license to all these people to talk like this. But that said, it's also a wake-up call for all good Americans to see this is how these people are talking. This is what they believe. And yes, they actually do believe it, and they are promoting it. And of course, it always works to their benefit. Sanaya, thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to SiriusXM. Dave in Los Angeles. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. We're on a psychic frequency here. I just got off the phone with my congressperson, or senator, should I say, complaining about the very thing when I tuned into you were discussing, and that's price gouging, right? Here, I live in California, and the prices at the pump are already beginning to go up already,
sure,
right? Now, what was in the pipeline or in these places where they store the petrol has already been there, but you see, vulture capitalism takes advantage in a way to which it defies humanity. Now, we're talking about violence. I do believe that the kinds of capitalism that you were discussing, or the so-called free market nonsense that this young man who worshiped at that altar that you was having your discussion with,
right?
You cannot get him to see beyond his dogma.
I agree.
Because it's just like talking to somebody who's some kind of religious fanatic.
Yeah.
You cannot get him to.
Yeah, it's almost like debating the existence of God.
Say again.
It's like debating the existence of God. He is. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Well, how do you know?
Yeah.
Free market. It's a magic thing. Oh yeah, really? Where?
And so I would suggest to you, Tom, that this system that we're under, You know, I travel America, and the kind of things that we've been witnessing in Houston furthers the character and the spirit and the heart of Americans, regardless to what their colors are. That has been my experience in personally interacting with various people through my travels from here to New York. That is the actual spirit and the heart of the American people, regardless to what their colors are. But you put them under the propaganda of this free market capitalism propaganda fed to them on a consistent and a constant basis. Then they begin to start spewing out this nonsense, and it affects their judgment, furthers their ability to deal with their own personal humanity when they are so inundated with this contradiction of a system that defies their humanity.
It seems to me
it blocks them off from their head. I mean, it blocks their heart from their head, and so it's like, how do you communicate with them? Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's my dilemma.
Yeah, it is a dilemma. At a certain level, I feel sometimes like I'm in the middle of one of Stanley Milgram's experiments. You know, it's the lack of empathy. The lack of understanding, on the hard right is bizarre. David, very well said. Thank you very much for everything that you said, and thanks for the call. I do appreciate it. We're going to hit a short break here, and we'll pick up more of your phone calls right after this. But it is anything goes summer here. It's Wednesday on the Thom Hartmann Program, and a lot of interesting topics. I really think we need to have a conversation about how to respond to right-wing violence. We'll be back with more of your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls. Welcome back. George in Forks, Washington. Hey, George, what's on your mind?
Tom, I first want to thank you. You have taught me a lot. But my comment was the young gentleman that's a libertarian on water and free enterprise and capitalism. Mm-hmm. I guess if he was in the ditch and it was 20 below and snowing, I should say, $500, I'll let you in my car. People really...
What's good for the goose? Is that?
I mean, it's just, that's raw capitalism.
Yeah.
You know, and...
Well, let's hope that Charles never has to confront that.
Well, I'm just saying it shouldn't be that way.
I agree.
But thank you for everything, Tom.
Okay. Thank you, George. Excellent point. Thank you very much. Jonathan in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, just keeping with this idea of price control. You know, capitalism already has things like price controls built into it, and even more so if you look at when we have a stock market crash, what happens? They pull the brakes on it. They just stop trading. Mm-hmm. So what they're talking about is an aberration in the market. Certainly a flood is an aberration in the market. Mm-hmm. You know, that kind of stuff already exists, and the idea that rich people are going to come around and buy up all the water for the swimming pools, well, I guess he forgot that the rich are only 1% of the population, so the idea that you're going to have, Mr. Howell coming to the local 7-Eleven with his monocle and his ascot asking for, 4,000 bottles of water for his, fountain is kind of silly.
Right. Well, that was my point, is most retailers, if they have a limited supply and it's an essential commodity, they're just going to say one per person.
But if there's any kind of aberration like that, like a storm, there should be no problem in having some kind of regulation to prevent, things like water from being, abused or people abusing.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you, Jonathan. Excuse me. I completely agree. Well said. Thank you for the call. Paul in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Paul, from Portland to Portland. What's up?
Hi. Yes, with the massive amounts of pipelines that we have to ship oil, thousands of miles, I am assuming, I believe that since there are fires over here in the Northwest and in California and Oregon, and there's flooding in Texas, what about the proposition of having a pipeline to shift water from coast to coast?
What? I don't get the question. Should we be? I mean, we are shipping water all over the place. I mean, there's Los Angeles is using water that starts out in Idaho, although much of it is shipped by river. But are you suggesting? What I'm seeing is that all over the country, with a few exceptions, we're looking at water shortages. I mean, Lake Lanier outside of Atlanta has been near drought stage. I'm not sure where it's at right now. California has been, Paul, clarify for me, please. I don't understand.
I guess I'm what I'm trying to say is distributing the water to where it's most needed, whether there's water shortages.
Oh, I see. Yeah, but then if you're getting into infrastructure things, you're getting into a much larger systemic discussion. And then also, there's the whole thing of the law of unintended consequences. I mean, we drilled wells all over the Midwest and then discovered, a century later that we were tapping into a very limited aquifer. Paul, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Kara in Cincinnati, Ohio. Hey, Kara, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was calling to speak on one of your callers who was talking about the nonviolence with Antifa, because I kind of agree with him. It has to be a multifaceted approach, but you cannot tell me a part of a marginalized community, a part of a community that has always been marginalized in this society, that I need to turn the other cheek and be nonviolent when my people are dying in the street. The boot of white supremacy and the systems in this country has always been violent towards us, always been violence towards black people and brown people. And I just don't understand how people can tell me to be nonviolent with violence. Anybody who's been bullied know if you're bullied, you put that bully on the concrete and he'll stop bullying you.
Yeah.
And so I don't.
At the level of the individual. But what happens when the bully is an entire culture? Kara, I would never tell you to absolutely never use violence or always use violence. I mean, that's your decision. My concern is that using violence on behalf of any marginalized community or anybody who's under attack, using violence will reduce the probability that the outcome you want will be achieved.
What alternative do you have? Everybody, when they talk about nonviolence, they want to talk about Martin Luther King.
Well, this is
still died at the hand of the people he were being nonviolent towards. In his house, he had people with shotguns. It wasn't totally when they were marching, yes, but the same systems that he was fighting are still that ideology. It's still here. It just changed tactics.
Yep.
But it's still here. Nothing has changed. It's still certain places here in Cincinnati I don't feel comfortable going.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you, Kara, but back to my question from before, if the marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, if John Lewis had whipped out a baton and started beating on Sheriff what's-his-name and had, cracked his skull, would that have led directly to the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act? I don't think so.
No, but those were concessions. Those were concessions
as a result of forgive my interrupting.
I'm sorry.
No. Finish your thought. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying, like, those were good. So now we can't sit at the same lunch counter. Our voter rights are still being, it doesn't matter. Things haven't changed all that much. Like I said, it's a facade of being changed, but it's not changing. I'm telling you from someone who is from this community. I'm telling you this from a person whose mother was a Black Panther. I'm telling you this from being born in St. Louis and still have, my grandmother being spit on in Ferguson and being cuffed and being told not to move by the Cincinnati police. And I was down there when we had our so-called riots, and these people are getting away with things that it's the same. It's been the same thing. It hasn't changed. So again, yes, they were nonviolent, but it didn't stop the violence towards them.
See, my answer to that question, Kara, is, and I may be wrong about this, I may be completely wrong about this, but my guess is that if John Lewis and the people with him had whipped out batons and shotguns and basically blown away the the cops and the townspeople who were being so violent toward the people of color there, that if they had done that, that instead of the events on the Pettus Bridge producing, indirectly albeit, but nonetheless producing the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, they would have produced laws against protest. They would have led to more crackdown. They would have turned America into more of a police state, as happened after the Detroit riots, as happened after a number of the riots that had happened back in the 60s and 70s. I was around. I remember them. And so my concern is that engaging in violence that is not purely self-defense. And I get it that Martin Luther King had armed guards when he was, at home, or when he was traveling in particular. But that's a different thing from marching down the street and saying, I'm here for a fight. And, I don't know. Kara, feel free to rebut me.
I understand the sentiment. I understand the sentiment to be nonviolent. But when you're met with, like, you being nonviolent and you're met with violence.
Sure.
All the time. A nonviolent protester can be a dead protester, and what they're protesting never gets resolved. Just like that poor lady, Heather Heyer.
Right.
Nothing's going to change.
Actually, I think
it's not going to change.
Actually, I think a lot did change. I think if Heather Heyer had not been killed in that protest, that the protest, the shock and horror all across the United States, would not have been as great, and people would have just said, "Oh yeah, there was two sides there; they were fighting with each other, big deal."
But think of what you said. Think of what you said. The shock, the shock of what happened to her.
Right.
What Trayvon
because she was nonviolent.
And Mike Brown and all these other people seem to both here in Cincinnati.
No, I think that those deaths are also radicalizing America in a positive way. They're waking people up. Kara, we're not gonna resolve this in the next 20 seconds. But thank you so much for the call and for a thoughtful conversation. I got a lot to think about. I appreciate it. Thank you, and thanks for listening to Sirius XM. Thank you all for being with us today. I'll let you pick, Troy.
Democracy is not a spectator sport.
As Bernie Sanders says. So get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.